What if the deadliest attack on a United States naval vessel since World War II wasn't an accident at all? What if 34 Americans died not in confusion, but as collateral damage in a weapons test so secret that the US government spent 50 years burying the truth beneath layers of classified silence? Before we dive into this story, I want to give a massive thank you to Mr. Hill420 and so many others who suggested this topic. Your curiosity drives these investigations, and I'm grateful for it. If you have ideas for future videos, drop them in the comments below. Now let's explore what really happened on June 8th, 1967 in the Eastern Mediterranean, and why the echoes of that day still reverberate through classified channels today. Act 1. The Silence Before the Storm. June 8th, 1967, 1400 local time. Eastern Mediterranean, 25 nautical miles off the Sinai coast. The USS Liberty cut through calm waters under a flawless Mediterranean sky. At 455 feet long and displacing over 10,000 tons, the modified Victory-class cargo ship looked unremarkable, a rusting relic of World War II pressed back into service. But appearances deceived. Bristling with antennas, microwave dishes, and SIGINT collection arrays, Liberty was the NSA's floating ear in the Middle East, listening to a region on the brink of tearing itself apart. The Six-Day War had erupted 4 days earlier. Regional powers clashed across ancient battlefields, while Cold War superpowers watched nervously from the sidelines. The Soviet Mediterranean squadron lurked just over the horizon. American forces maintained a tense neutrality, and through it all, Liberty listened. Below decks, in the cramped research spaces that reeked of coffee, cigarette smoke and hot electronics, 45 cryptologic technicians from the Naval Security Group worked in shifts. They monitored everything: military communications, diplomatic channels, encrypted transmissions from ships and aircraft across the region. Every signal, every transmission, every whispered order flowed through their receivers and into the classified intelligence pipeline feeding Fort Meade, Maryland. Petty Officer First Class Mark Reynolds had been on station for 6 hours straight. At 24 years old, he possessed the kind of focused intensity that made him perfect for signals intelligence work, able to distinguish signal from noise in the chaotic electromagnetic spectrum of a war zone. His station monitored multiple frequencies, including those reserved for American military operations. At 14:13, Reynolds's headphones crackled with a transmission that made him straighten in his chair. The signal came through on a frequency that shouldn't have been active, a restricted channel reserved for classified naval operations. The encryption pattern was sophisticated, military grade, but something felt wrong. Reynolds keyed his recorder and leaned closer. "Shadow 7 to Cyan Control," a voice said in clear English with an American accent. "Phase 2 parameters confirmed. Frequency modulation holding at 7.83 Hz. Standing by for sequence initiation." Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. Cyan Control? That designation didn't appear in any briefing material, and that frequency, 7.83 Hz, meant nothing to him in military terms. He scribbled notes frantically. A second voice responded, also American, clipped and efficient. "Cyan Control confirms. Maintain visual contact with target vessel until phase termination. Weather conditions optimal. Execute on my mark." "Target vessel?" Reynolds' hand moved to the intercom switch to alert the communications officer, but he hesitated. Intercepting US military communications wasn't unusual. The NSA gathered signals from American forces routinely for training and verification purposes. But this felt different. That frequency, the deliberate emphasis on visual contact, the designation Cyan. He never got the chance to report it. At 14:14, the radar operator 2 compartments forward shouted into the circuit. "Multiple surface contacts bearing 090, range 30 miles and closing. Fast movers. Confirmed aircraft." On the bridge, Commander William McGonigal lowered his binoculars and squinted into the eastern sky. He'd been tracking distant aircraft for the past 20 minutes, reconnaissance flights he'd assumed. The Liberty flew an American flag the size of a garage door. The hull number was clearly visible. In these conditions, with visibility exceeding 10 miles and zero wind, there was no possibility of confusion. At 14:15, 3 unidentified jet fighters dropped from high altitude and screamed toward the Liberty at 500 knots. The first indication of hostile intent came not from weapons but from proximity. The aircraft circled the ship 3 times, low enough that sailors on deck could see them clearly. Some waved, assuming they were friendly forces. A few took photographs. Then the fighters banked hard and lined up for attack runs. What happened next would be disputed for decades, analysed frame by frame, dissected in naval courts and congressional hearings. But for the men aboard Liberty, the truth was simple and absolute. They were being attacked by unidentified forces. The first cannon rounds shredded the forward antennas at 14:16. Radar dishes exploded in sparks. Communications arrays tumbled into the sea. The aircraft made multiple passes, their weapons stitching lines of destruction across the deck and superstructure. Commander McGonagall stood on the bridge wing, fully exposed, shouting orders as shrapnel tore through steel around him. He wouldn't leave his post, wouldn't abandon the con even as the windows exploded inward and instrument panels sparked and died. Below decks, Reynolds clutched his headphones as the compartment shook. The overhead lights flickered. Then, through the static and interference, he heard it again, that American voice, calm and analytical. Sine wave sequence maintaining coherence. Phase 2 progressing nominally. His recorder was still running. At 14:24, the fighters broke off. For 8 minutes, an eerie quiet descended. Damage control teams scrambled topside. The wounded screamed for corpsmen. Fires burned in 3 compartments. Then sonar picked up high-speed screws. 3 unidentified torpedo boats emerged from the coastal haze, their decks crowded with sailors manning deck guns. They opened fire immediately, 40mm and 20mm rounds hammering the Liberty's hull, shredding life rafts, killing sailors who'd made it to the deck. At 14:31, one of the boats fired a torpedo. The torpedo struck the Liberty on the starboard side, below the waterline, directly beneath the signal's intelligence spaces. The explosion ripped through the research compartments like a fist through tissue paper. Bulkheads buckled. Seawater rushed in. 25 men died instantly, crushed or drowned in the flooding. Mark Reynolds survived only because he'd been thrown against a bulkhead by the blast. Unconscious, bleeding, half submerged in rising water, he clutched his recorder as shipmates dragged him through the darkness toward the ladders. The attack continued for another 40 minutes. By the time the attacking forces withdrew at 15:30, Liberty was a floating wreck. 34 men were dead. 171 were wounded. The ship listed heavily to starboard, fires still burning, taking on water. But she didn't sink, and below decks, in the flooded research spaces, a magnetic tape labelled Sine Wave Intercept 6867 floated in the darkness, sealed inside Reynolds's waterproof recorder bag. Act 2. The Inquiry. September the 1967. Naval Court of Inquiry. Malta. The official inquiry convened 3 months after the attack, far from American shores and prying media. Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd Jr. presided, a stern-faced officer with 30 years of service and a reputation for thorough investigation. The court's mandate was clear: determine what happened, who was responsible, and whether Liberty's crew bore any fault for their own casualties. From the beginning, something felt wrong. Witnesses testified to crystal-clear weather, a clearly marked American flag, the ship's hull number visible for miles. They described the methodical nature of the assault, not frenzied combat, but deliberate targeting of antennas and communications equipment. Some testified to seeing torpedo boats machine-gunning life rafts. The official explanation came swiftly: a case of mistaken identity during a chaotic regional conflict. Foreign forces had confused Liberty for an enemy vessel. Tragic but understandable in the fog of war, sincere apologies, compensation offered. The American government accepted this explanation within hours of the attack, but the evidence suggested otherwise. On the 3rd day of testimony, Mark Reynolds took the stand. His face was still mottled with burn scars, his left hand bandaged. He walked with a pronounced limp. The court recorder noted that he seemed nervous, kept glancing at the door. Admiral Kidd asked him to describe his duties on June 8th. Reynolds began with routine details, his station, his assignment, the frequencies he monitored. Then he paused. "Sir, I need to submit evidence," Reynolds said quietly. "What sort of evidence, Petty Officer?" "An audio recording. I made it during the attack. It contains transmissions I intercepted on a secure frequency. American voices coordinating the attack sequence." The courtroom went silent. Kidd leaned forward. "You recorded American personnel coordinating an attack on an American vessel." "I don't know what I recorded, sir. But the voices were American. They used a designation I'd never heard before, Cyan Wave. They spoke about phase sequences, frequency modulation, maintaining visual contact with the target vessel." Reynolds produced a reel-to-reel tape from a canvas bag, labelled in his own handwriting, "Cyan Wave Intercept 6867. A Navy lawyer immediately objected. The tape hadn't been submitted through proper evidence channels. Its chain of custody was questionable. Reynolds himself admitted he'd kept it hidden for 3 months, afraid of what might happen if he turned it over. Admiral Kidd examined the tape without playing it. "This will be entered into evidence and reviewed by appropriate authorities. Petty Officer Reynolds, you are to discuss this with no one outside this court. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." The tape was logged as Evidence Item 47B, placed in a sealed envelope and transferred to a secure evidence locker. It vanished. No official record of the tape exists in the declassified inquiry documents. Reynolds' testimony about it was redacted from the public version of the proceedings. When he tried to follow up weeks later, he was told the tape had been misplaced during transfer to NSA custody for technical analysis. 3 months later, Reynolds received orders to a submarine tender in the Pacific. His security clearance was administratively reduced. His service record noted, "Not recommended for cryptologic assignments." He never spoke publicly about Liberty or Cyan Wave again. Fort Meade, Maryland, November 1967. NASA headquarters. Linda Baker had worked for the National Security Agency for 11 years, analysing signals intelligence from every corner of the globe. At 36, she was one of the senior analysts in the Naval SIGINT Division, trusted with the most sensitive intercepts. In November 1967, she was tasked with reviewing backup recordings from the Liberty attack, part of the NSA's internal assessment of what went wrong with their intelligence collection that day. The work was tedious. Hours of radio chatter, static, routine military communications. But Baker had a gift for pattern recognition, for seeing anomalies others missed. On her 4th day reviewing the backups, she noticed something odd. At several points during the attack, 1414, 1422, 1429 and 1441, her spectrum analysis showed unusual electromagnetic activity. Brief bursts of extremely low-frequency interference, lasting only seconds but powerful enough to partially distort other signals. She ran the frequencies through analysis software, 7.83 Hz, repeating. Baker frowned. That frequency was known as the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's ionosphere, created by lightning discharges globally. It had nothing to do with military communications. Radio equipment didn't operate at that frequency. It was too low, too weak, essentially background noise of the planet itself. So why did it appear in military signal intercepts at the exact moments of Liberty's attack phases? She wrote a technical memo and submitted it through channels. The response came back 3 days later. Technical artifact. Atmospheric interference. No intelligence value. But Baker wasn't satisfied. She cross-referenced the timing against the attack timeline reconstructed from survivor testimony. The frequency spikes occurred precisely when aircraft began their runs, when the torpedo boats opened fire, when the torpedo was launched. Not random atmospheric interference, coordinated. She tried to dig deeper, requesting access to Liberty's raw intercept logs, the unprocessed recordings captured by the ship's equipment. Her request was denied. Those materials were classified at a level above your current access. Linda Baker had top-secret clearance. What could be above that? She tried a different approach. Using her access to the NSA's internal file system, she searched for any mention of Cyan Wave. One result appeared, A project file from 1965, heavily redacted, sponsored jointly by DARPA and the Office of Naval Intelligence. The project number was CW-12/7. The file contained only 3 pages. Most of it was blacked out, but one paragraph remained visible. Project Scion Wave explores applications of extremely low-frequency electromagnetic modulation for tactical radar signature manipulation. Testing requires controlled combat environment with multiple sensor platforms. Operational security classification, Cosmic Top Secret. Cosmic Top Secret was a NATO designation, higher than anything in the standard US classification system. Baker printed the page, then immediately regretted it. She looked around her cubicle, suddenly paranoid. This wasn't just classified. This was the kind of material people's careers ended over. She folded the page into her purse and deleted her search history. That night she typed a summary of her findings and mailed it to herself at her home address. If something happened to her at work, if these files disappeared, or she was suddenly reassigned, at least she'd have proof she'd seen them. 2 weeks later, her supervisor called her into a meeting. NSA Security was conducting a routine review of database access logs. Nothing to worry about, just standard procedure. They asked her about her search for Scion Wave. Baker kept her face neutral. I came across the term in a Liberty Intercept backup and wanted to understand the context. And did you? No, the file was mostly redacted. The security officer smiled. Good. That means the classification system is working. In the future, if you encounter project names you don't recognize, please submit an information request through proper channels rather than searching directly. Understood. Understood. She wasn't reassigned. Her clearance wasn't revoked, but the message was clear. Some doors stay closed. Linda Baker returned to her routine work, analysing intercepts from Vietnam and the Soviet Union. She never searched for Scion Wave again, but she kept that printed page hidden in a safety deposit box. Act 3. The Declassified Ghost. 2003 to 2017. The Long Thaw. In the years following the Cold War's end, the intelligence community slowly began declassifying historical materials under the Freedom of Information Act. Thousands of pages from the 1960s and 70s filtered into public archives, NSA operational summaries, CIA memoranda, military intelligence assessments. The USS Liberty attack, still controversial decades later, attracted particular attention from researchers and conspiracy theorists. Survivors had formed advocacy groups. Journalists had written books questioning the official mistaken identity narrative. The government maintained its story quietly but firmly. In 2003, the NSA released the first batch of Liberty-related intercepts, heavily redacted but enough to confirm that the agency had been monitoring communications in real time during the attack. Linda Baker, now retired and 72 years old, read about the release in the Washington Post. She'd thought about that day in 1967 occasionally over the decades, wondered what had really happened to that tape, whether anyone else had noticed those strange frequency spikes. She requested her old security clearance be reactivated, a privilege available to retired intelligence personnel for consulting work. The approval took 6 months, but eventually she received her credentials and access to the NSA's historical archives in College Park, Maryland. She spent 3 weeks reading through the declassified Liberty materials. Most of it she'd seen before, the attack timeline, intercept summaries, damage reports. But then she noticed something. In the official NSA summary from June 1967, the page numbers jumped. Page 13 was followed by page 15. Page 14 was missing. Baker checked the original classification log. Page 14 had been titled Classified Naval Operations, Coordination with Advanced Research Projects. That page remained classified. She submitted a FOIA request for page 14 specifically. The response took 2 years. Denied. Material still classified in the interest of national security. But Baker had spent 11 years at NSA. She knew how to read around redactions, how to find information in metadata and file structures. She started pulling every document from 1967 that referenced classified naval operations in the Mediterranean. Most were routine, submarine deployments, carrier group movements, Soviet naval tracking operations, Then she found it. A budget document from early 1967, listing project expenditures for the Office of Naval Research. Buried in a table of appropriations, CW 12/7, Field Test Coordination, $8.7 million. The date range, May 15th, 1967 to June 30th, 1967, exactly covering the period of the Six-Day War. Baker's hands trembled as she photographed the page with her phone. After 50 years, proof that sine wave wasn't a phantom, wasn't something she'd imagined. She kept digging. Over the next 2 years, she found fragments. A 1968 memo from DARPA referencing successful field demonstration of phase cancellation radar spoofing technology in operational environment. A 1970 patent application, US Patent 5,159,703, for electromagnetic signature modulation device, listing 3 inventors from Raytheon Advanced Systems and the Naval Research Laboratory. A 1982 intelligence report on Soviet radar capabilities noting, Soviet naval defense systems exhibit vulnerability to low-frequency phase modulation, similar to effects observed during classified operations in 1967. The pattern was unmistakable. Sine wave had been real, it had been tested, and Liberty had been there when it happened. But why attack the ship? If Liberty was collecting data for the NSA, if this was an American military operation, why would they attack their own intelligence vessel? Unless Liberty wasn't supposed to be there, unless the ship's presence was unauthorized, and its advanced listening equipment threatened to record something that was never meant to be recorded. Unless Liberty itself was the target, not by foreign forces, but by elements within the US military, conducting a weapons test that required complete secrecy. 2017. The breakthrough. In March 2017, the NSA released another batch of Liberty documents, the most extensive yet, over 3,000 pages. Researchers around the world began combing through them. Linda Baker, now 86 and fighting lung cancer, received a call from James Wilson, a historian at the Naval War College who'd been studying Liberty for 2 decades. "Linda, I found something," Wilson said, "in the intercept logs. There's a reference to your name." "What kind of reference?" "A memo from December 1967. Subject: Analyst concerns regarding low-frequency interference in Liberty intercepts. It says you submitted a technical report about unusual electromagnetic readings during the attack. Did you?" "Yes. They told me it was atmospheric interference. The memo says your analysis was forwarded to something called the Advanced Concepts Group for evaluation. That group reported directly to the NSA director. Whatever you found, Linda, it went to the very top." Baker felt a chill. "What else does it say?" "That your findings were consistent with expected technical signatures of active countermeasure systems." "Linda, they knew. They knew what you'd found, and they buried it." "Can you send me that memo?" "Already did. Check your email." Baker opened her laptop with shaking hands. The memo appeared on screen, typed on NSA letterhead, signed by an assistant director whose name had been redacted. One sentence leaped out at her. Analyst Baker's detection of 7.83 Hz modulation during combat operations confirmed successful field implementation of Project CW 12/7 parameters. Successful field implementation? They tested their radar spoofing technology using Liberty as an unwitting target, used it to make the ship appear and disappear on radar screens, creating confusion, creating plausible deniability for an attack that would destroy the evidence of the test itself. 34 Americans had died to protect a secret weapons program. But who had conducted the actual attack? Foreign forces used as unwitting proxies, unmarked US aircraft and vessels, mercenaries hired through intelligence cutouts. The memo didn't say. Perhaps that was the final layer of the secret, ensuring that even if the truth about sine wave emerged, no one could definitively prove who had pulled the triggers. Baker stared at the screen for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called someone she thought she'd never contact again. Act 4. The recording. 2025, 8 years later. Washington, D.C. Evan Carter was 34 years old and tired of writing about budget hearings and committee appointments for the Washington political blog that employed him. He'd gone into journalism to expose corruption, to hold power accountable. Instead, he spent his days rewriting press releases and attending briefings where nobody said anything real. Then a package arrived at his office with no return address, postmarked from Newport News, Virginia, home to the largest naval shipyard on the East Coast. Inside was a reel-to-reel tape in a waterproof bag, labelled in faded ink, Sine Wave Intercept 6867. Also inside, a typed note on yellowed paper. "Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but I know your work. This recording was made aboard USS Liberty during the attack on June 8th, 1967. I was told to destroy it. I couldn't. Before I die, someone should hear what really happened that day. Listen carefully. Look for Sine Wave. They're still using it. MR." Carter's first instinct was to throw it away. Anonymous packages, conspiracy theories about 50-year-old incidents. This was exactly the kind of rabbit hole that destroyed journalists' credibility. But curiosity won. He took the tape to an audio restoration specialist in Baltimore who digitized it for $200 and didn't ask questions. That night, Carter sat in his apartment with noise-cancelling headphones and pressed play. For the first minute, nothing but static and distant voices. Then clearer, military radio traffic, terse commands, acknowledgements. Someone was intercepting operational communications in real time. At timestamp 1413, an American voice cut through. "Shadow 7 to Cyan Control. Phase 2 parameters confirmed. Frequency modulation holding at 7.83 Hz. Standing by for sequence initiation." Carter stopped the playback, rewound it, listened again. American voice. American military radio protocol, speaking about a phase sequence moments before the attack began. He kept listening. At 1416, the sound changed. Loud cracks, metallic impacts, screaming. The attack had begun. Through the chaos, another American voice, older, strained. "Cyan Control, this is Liberty Actual. We are under fire. We are a United States vessel. Cease fire! Cease fire!" That voice was familiar. Carter paused the recording and pulled up archival footage of Liberty survivors on YouTube. Commander William McGonigal, the ship's captain, giving testimony before Congress in 1982, the same voice. But according to all historical accounts, McGonigal had been on the bridge, fully exposed, with no radio equipment. He'd communicated through the bridge circuit, which had been destroyed in the first minutes of the attack, so how was he on this recording, speaking on a secure frequency that shouldn't have existed? Carter listened to the entire 75 minutes. The attack unfolded in real time. The aircraft, the torpedo boats, the screams, the chaos. And beneath it all, periodically cutting through, those calm American voices. Maintain visual lock, phase progression nominal, data collection continuing. At timestamp 1528, just before the attacking forces withdrew, one final transmission. Cyan Control to all stations, phase termination in 60 seconds, secure all data collection equipment. Shadow 7, confirm recording status. Recording complete, 73 minutes of continuous sensor data. Phase cancellation maintained throughout engagement. Excellent. Return to station. Operation Cyan Wave is concluded. Then silence. Carter sat in the darkness of his apartment, heart pounding. He just listened to evidence of a classified US military operation targeting one of its own ships. Not mistaken identity, not accidental friendly fire, a test. He needed verification. He needed someone who'd understand the technical implications, someone with intelligence community experience. He thought about that note's warning. They're still using it. Using what? Radar spoofing technology? This Cyan Wave system? Carter spent the next week researching. He found Linda Baker's name in declassified NSA documents about Liberty, one of the analysts who'd reviewed the intercepts. She'd be in her 90s now if she was still alive. A record search found her in Arlington, Virginia, age 94, still alive. He called her number. She answered on the fourth ring. "Mrs. Baker, my name is Evan Carter. I'm a journalist in Washington. I have a recording I think you need to hear." "What kind of recording?" "It's labelled Cyan Wave Intercept, from June 8th, 1967. The line went silent for so long Carter thought she'd hung up. "Come to my house tomorrow," Baker said finally. Come alone, bring the recording. Arlington, Virginia, the next day. Linda Baker's home was a small ranch house in a quiet neighbourhood, the yard immaculately maintained, American flag on the porch. Carter knocked, and she answered immediately, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis. "Mr. Carter, come in." Her living room was neat, military precise, walls covered with framed photographs. A younger Baker in the 1960s professional attire, posed with colleagues outside Fort Meade. Citations for distinguished service. A shadow box with medals. Carter set up his laptop and played the recording. Baker listened with her eyes closed, hands folded in her lap. When McGonagall's voice came through, "Cyan Control, this is Liberty Actual," her eyes opened sharply. "That's not possible," she whispered. Carter paused the playback. "What's not possible?" "That voice. That's Commander McGonagall. I heard his testimony before Congress. But he couldn't have been transmitting on that frequency. The bridge communications were destroyed. Unless... Unless what?" Baker stood slowly and walked to a bookshelf. She removed a thick photo album and opened it, revealing not photographs but papers, decades-old documents, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "I kept copies," she said. "Things I wasn't supposed to keep. Things I thought might matter someday." She showed Carter the 1967 memo referencing the 7.83 Hz frequency spikes, the budget document listing sine wave funding, the patent application for electromagnetic signature modulation. It was a test, Baker said. They were testing radar spoofing technology, making ships appear and disappear on radar screens by manipulating extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields. Liberty's sensors were sophisticated enough to detect it, to record it, so they had to eliminate the evidence. By attacking their own ship, by creating a plausible cover story, a regional conflict, mistaken identity, fog of war. The attackers, whoever they actually were, could claim confusion. The US government accepts the explanation to protect its weapons program. 34 dead sailors become classified collateral damage. Carter felt sick. But the recording, McGonagall's voice. How? Two possibilities, Baker said. Either there were two separate communication streams, one real, one for the test control, or the recording itself is partially fabricated. Someone created a comprehensive audio record of the operation for documentation purposes, splicing together real combat recordings with test control transmissions. Who would do that? The NSA, DARPA, the Office of Naval Intelligence, any agency running a black budget program that needs to document results without creating discoverable evidence. Carter thought about the anonymous note. They're still using it. "Mrs. Baker, if this technology existed in 1967, what would it look like now? 58 years of development?" Baker smiled grimly. "Stealth technology, active radar cancellation, electronic warfare systems that can make fighter jets invisible, ships disappear, missiles appear where they aren't. Every major military on Earth now uses descendants of what they tested that day. Can you prove any of this? Not in a way that would hold up in court, not in a way that would force declassification. The people who ordered it are dead. The paper trail is fragments and redactions. All we have are patterns and implications." Carter gestured at his laptop. "We have this recording." "Do we? Where did it come from? Who sent it? Could be authentic. Could be disinformation designed to surface and be debunked, discrediting everyone who takes it seriously. That's how intelligence agencies protect secrets, not by hiding them, but by surrounding them with so much noise that the truth becomes indistinguishable from paranoia." They sat in silence. "What do I do with this?" Carter asked finally. "What every journalist does. You tell the story. You let people decide what they believe. But understand, if you publish this, you'll be attacked, called a conspiracy theorist. Your credibility will be questioned. Sources will dry up. And if the recording is real, if there really are people still using this technology, they won't be happy that you've exposed it." Carter looked at the old woman across from him, someone who'd kept these secrets for nearly 60 years, waiting for the right moment. "Why didn't you go public, back in 1967 or any time since?" "Because I wasn't brave enough," Baker said simply, "and because I wasn't sure it would matter. The world had moved on. The technology proliferated. What would exposing it accomplish except my own destruction? Then why help me now? Because I'm 94 years old and dying. Because 34 sailors deserve better than being written off as collateral damage in a mistaken identity incident. And because someone sent you that recording for a reason, maybe it's time for the truth. Act 5. The Modern Implication. 3 months later. Evan Carter published his story in The Atlantic. Operation Cyan Wave. New evidence suggests USS Liberty attack was classified US weapons test. The response was immediate and polarised. Survivors of the Liberty attack and their families praised the article. Military historians debated its implications. Intelligence community veterans appeared on news programmes to denounce it as baseless speculation. The Pentagon declined to comment. Carter received death threats. He also received calls from 3 former NSA analysts who claimed they'd seen similar frequency anomalies in other classified operations from the Cold War era. None would go on record. 2 weeks after publication, Carter received a formal letter from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence requesting he turn over the original recording for authentication analysis. He declined through his lawyer, citing source protection. The story faded from the news cycle after a month. Some things are too old, too buried, too protected by institutional inertia to ever fully surface. But Carter kept digging. He found the patent Linda Baker had mentioned, US Patent 5159703. Method and apparatus for electromagnetic signature modulation. Filed in 1970, granted in 1992. The inventors, Richard Kellerman, Raytheon Advanced Systems, David Morse, DARPA Research Division, and Thomas Chen, Naval Research Laboratory. The patent described using extremely low-frequency electromagnetic pulses to create phase cancellation of radar return signals, making objects invisible to radar detection. Commercial application: stealth technology for military aircraft and naval vessels. The patent cited prior research from 1965 to 1967, but didn't name the project. Carter found academic papers from the 1980s and 90s discussing the Schumann resonance, that's 7.83 Hz frequency, and its potential military applications. Theoretical work on using Earth's natural electromagnetic field as a carrier signal for undetectable communications or radar manipulation. He found a 2003 Defense Advanced Research Projects agency request for proposals. Iron field stabilization, active phase defense systems for next-generation electronic warfare. The technology had never stopped developing. Whatever they tested on Liberty in 1967 had evolved into the cutting edge of modern military technology. The secret had been protected not just to avoid accountability for an attack, but to preserve a strategic advantage that was still relevant today. Arlington National Cemetery, November 2025. On a cold afternoon, 58 years after the attack, the US Navy unveiled a memorial plaque for the USS Liberty at Arlington National Cemetery. A small ceremony, attended by aging survivors, family members, and a handful of Navy officials. Linda Baker attended in a wheelchair, oxygen tank at her side. She watched as a Marine Honor Guard presented the colours, and a Navy chaplain offered prayers for the dead. When the ceremony ended, a man in civilian clothes approached her. Late 50s, grey suit, no identifying credentials. "Mrs. Baker? I'm with the Office of Naval Intelligence, thank you for attending." "Did you know them?" "The men who died?" "No, ma'am. Before my time, but I wanted to thank you personally." "For what?" "For your service. For your discretion over the years. For helping close an old file." Baker looked at him sharply. "I didn't close anything. The journalist's story is still out there." The man smiled. "Stories fade. Conspiracy theories multiply and discredit themselves. What matters is that the institutional memory remains consistent. Tragic accident. Mistaken identity. Fog of war. Some things are better left under the waterline where they belong." He handed her a business card, blank except for a phone number. "If you ever need anything, Mrs. Baker, the Navy takes care of its own." He walked away before she could respond. That night, Baker sat in her living room, too tired to sleep. She thought about Mark Reynolds, whoever he was now, whatever had happened to him. She thought about the men who died on Liberty. She thought about all the secrets she'd kept and all the years that had passed. Her computer chimed. Incoming email. The sender address was a random string of characters, no subject line. She opened it. The message contained only 2 lines of text and an audio file attachment. Echo phase reactivated. Frequency 7.83 Hz detected. Eastern Med Array. Baker's hand trembled as she clicked the attachment. A waveform appeared on her screen. Audio data, time-stamped from the earlier that day. She plugged in her headphones and pressed play. At first, nothing. White noise. The hiss of distant ocean monitoring equipment. Then, gradually emerging from the background, a low rhythmic pulse. Steady. Measured. Precisely 7.83 Hz. The same frequency she detected 58 years ago. The pulse continued for 30 seconds, growing slightly louder, more distinct, and beneath it so faint she had to turn the volume to maximum. Something else. Not random noise. Pattern. Structure. Multiple voices overlapped and distorted, speaking in fragments. Phase alignment confirmed. Target lock acquired. Maintain visual until... Cyan control. Baker's breath caught. These weren't recordings from 1967. The audio quality was too clean, too digital. This was new, current, happening right now. She checked the timestamp again. November 15th, 2025, 1413 UTC. The exact same time the Liberty attack had begun, 58 years earlier, 1413 local time in the Eastern Mediterranean. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Someone was running the system again, in the same location, at the same time, either as a test, a demonstration, or an actual operation. The audio file continued playing. The pulse grew stronger, more insistent, until it began to synchronize with something else, a deeper rhythm, slower, familiar. It took her a moment to recognize it. A heartbeat, human heartbeat rhythm, approximately 60 beats per minute. The electromagnetic pulse was modulating to match it, as if the technology itself had evolved to interface with biological rhythms, making it harder to distinguish from natural background noise. The sound built, layering upon itself, electromagnetic pulse, human heartbeat, those fragmented voices, all blending into a single resonant frequency that made Baker's chest feel tight, her own heart seeming to synchronize with the rhythm coming through her headphones. At exactly 60 seconds, the audio cut out. Silence. Baker sat frozen, headphones still on, staring at her computer screen. The email had already disappeared from her inbox. She checked her deleted folder, her spam folder. Nothing. As if it had never existed. But the audio file was still on her desktop, and she tried to open it again. The file was corrupted, 0 bytes, unreadable. Someone had sent her evidence of an active operation and then remotely erased it, leaving her with nothing but memory and the knowledge that after 58 years, Cyan Wave wasn't history. It was still operational, still secret, still being used somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean at this very moment. Baker closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her living room. Outside, a cold November wind rattled the windows. The American flag on her porch snapped and rippled. She thought about those 34 sailors, about Mark Reynolds and his stolen tape, about Commander McGonagall standing on that bridge refusing to abandon his post, even as his ship was destroyed around him. She thought about all the secrets she'd kept, all the years of silence and whether any of it had mattered. Her phone sat on the table beside her. She could call Carter, tell him about the email, the audio, the active signal, but what would that accomplish? Another story that would be denied, debunked, dismissed. Or she could do nothing, let it go, die with her secrets intact, having spent her whole life in the shadows of classified operations. Baker picked up the phone. She dialed Carter's number. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Baker, are you okay? It's almost midnight." "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "they're running it again. Right now, same location, same time. I just received proof." "Received from who?" "I don't know. Someone who wants me to know, or wants to see what I'll do with the information." "Do you still have the proof?" "No." It erased itself, but I heard it, Evan, that frequency, those voices. It's not historical, it's active, right now. Carter was silent for a moment. What do you want me to do? I want you to keep digging. Keep asking questions. Don't let them bury it for another 58 years. Those men deserve better. The truth deserves better. And you? What will you do? Baker looked at the blank business card from the O&I officer, still sitting on her coffee table. I'm going to make a phone call, she said. I'm going to tell them I know. And then I'm going to sleep better than I have in 58 years. They might... I'm 94 years old and dying of cancer, Evan. What are they going to do? The only power they have over me is silence. And I'm done being silent. She hung up before he could argue. Baker sat for a long time, holding that blank business card, thinking about consequences and courage and the weight of truth. Finally, at 12:47 a.m, she dialed the number. It rang once. A voice answered. Male, neutral, professional. Yes? This is Linda Baker. Someone wanted me to know that sine wave is still active. I'm calling to tell you that I know. I've always known. And now someone else knows too. Silence on the line then. Mrs. Baker, I think you may be confused. Perhaps. I'm not confused. I was there from the beginning. I saw the frequency data. I kept the documents. And tonight I heard the same pulse, live, from the Eastern Mediterranean. You can deny it, classify it, bury it under 50 more years of secrecy, but you can't stop the truth from eventually surfacing. Another pause. When the voice returned, it was colder. The truth, Mrs. Baker, is complicated. National security requires difficult decisions. Sometimes the greater good demands sacrifice. Tell that to the 34 men who died. Their sacrifice advanced American defensive capabilities that have protected thousands of lives since. Would you undo that? I would have found another way. One that didn't require killing our own sailors. There was no other way. And if you truly believed what you're saying, you would have gone public decades ago. But you didn't. Because you understand the necessity of secrets. Baker closed her eyes. He was right. She'd had 58 years to speak. She'd chosen silence. Until now. You're right, she said softly. I should have spoken sooner. But I can end my life having finally told the truth. Sine wave happened. It's still happening. And people deserve to know. No one will believe you without proof. And you have none. Maybe. But I'm not the only one who knows anymore. And eventually secrets always surface. Good night, Mrs. Baker. Thank you for your service. The line went dead. Baker set down the phone and exhaled slowly. Her heart was racing. She felt more alive than she had in years. She'd done it. Finally, after all this time, she'd confronted the people who'd buried the truth for 6 decades. Outside, a car started somewhere on her street. Engine noise, headlights briefly washing across her windows, then darkness again. If they were watching, let them watch. She'd said what needed to be said. Baker went to bed and slept deeply for the first time in 58 years. Epilogue. 6 months later, May 2026. Linda Baker died peacefully in her sleep on May 3rd, 2026 at the age of 94. Her obituary in the Washington Post mentioned her distinguished career at the National Security Agency and her contributions to signals intelligence during the Cold War. It did not mention USS Liberty or Sine Wave. Evan Carter attended her funeral in Arlington. A military honor guard was present. Several elderly former NSA colleagues paid their respects. The O&I officer in the grey suit stood in the back, watching. After the service, Carter found a manila envelope on his car windshield, secured under the wiper blade. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note in Linda Baker's shaky script, dated 2 weeks before her death. Mr. Carter, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Enclosed is everything I kept over the years. Documents, audio files, analysis. Use your judgment. Some truths are worth the cost, some aren't. You'll have to decide. But decide honestly. Don't let fear make the choice for you. Those sailors died for a secret. Make sure their deaths meant something. LB. Carter plugged the USB drive into his laptop that night. Hundreds of files. Scanned documents from the 1960s and 70s. Audio recordings, technical analyses, Linda Baker's complete archive of everything she'd learned about Operation Cyan Wave. At the bottom of the directory, one video file for Evan.mp4. He clicked it. Linda Baker appeared on screen, sitting in her living room, clearly unwell but sharp-eyed. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 days before her death. "Hello, Evan," she said. "If you're watching this, I kept my promise to myself. I died having told the truth. Everything on this drive is real. Cyan Wave existed. It was tested on Liberty. 34 men died to protect it, and it's still being used today. You have a choice now. Publish this and face the consequences, or put it away and let the secret stay buried. I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this. Those sailors didn't have a choice. They were sacrificed by people who saw them as expendable. The least we owe them is the truth. Whatever you decide, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for giving an old woman the courage to finally do the right thing." She smiled sadly. "Good luck, Evan. The truth is a heavy burden, but it's the only thing worth carrying." The video ended. Carter sat in silence, the weight of decision pressing down on him. Outside, Washington, D.C. hummed with the machinery of government, agencies and institutions and classified programs operating in shadows, protecting secrets that might be vital or might be criminal. He thought about Linda Baker, about Mark Reynolds, about Commander McGonagall and 34 sailors who died in the Mediterranean. He thought about truth and consequences, about secrecy and accountability. Then he opened a new document and began to write. The title appeared, Operation Cyan Wave, The Complete Story. Whether he would publish it, whether the world would ever read it, whether the truth would be more than fragments and implications, that remained uncertain. But at least now someone knew. Someone had listened. Someone was carrying the burden forward, and somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, at precisely 14:13 local time, a low-frequency pulse cycled through the electromagnetic spectrum at 7.83 Hz, detected by satellites and monitoring stations, part of a system that had never stopped evolving, never stopped operating, never stopped echoing across the decades since that June afternoon in 1967. The sound built, layered with meaning and memory. It matched a human heartbeat. It faded into silence, and the world moved on, carrying its secrets, waiting for the day when truth would surface, not as conspiracy but as history, when those 34 sailors would receive something more than a memorial plaque, waiting for the echoes to finally be heard. Before we descend into the darkness, I want to thank Alim Fuzzy and so many others who suggested this story. Your ideas fuel these investigations into history's hidden corners. If you have suggestions for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. Who knows what we'll uncover next? They say the Earth keeps secrets. But what if those secrets are trying to speak? In 1943, while the world tore itself apart above ground, something beneath the soil began to hum. A frequency, a pattern, a message that would haunt American intelligence agencies for 4 decades and cost lives to keep buried. This is the story of Project Echo, a conspiracy that began with one man hearing voices in the dark and ended with proof, that we are not alone beneath our feet. What you're about to read sounds impossible, but every historical anchor, every declassified document, every coincidental death, they're all real. The question isn't whether this happened. The question is, why are they still listening? Act 1. The Signal, 1943 to 1946. December 1943, Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. Lieutenant James Holloway had been underground for 6 hours, and the darkness was getting to him. The Army Signal Corps had sent him and his acoustic team into the deepest sections of Mammoth Cave with equipment that weighed nearly 300 pounds, hydrophones, seismographs, and the new electromagnetic sensors that were supposed to help them detect Nazi submarines through underwater sound channels. But this wasn't about submarines. Not really. "Sir, you need to hear this," Corporal Eddie Chen called from the makeshift station they'd erected near the frozen Niagara Formation. His voice echoed strangely in the limestone chamber, distorted by the cave's natural acoustics. Holloway made his way across the uneven floor, his flashlight beam cutting through the absolute blackness. Chen was hunched over the oscilloscope, his face pale in the green glow of the screen. "What am I looking at?" Holloway asked. "That's just it, sir." "I don't know." Chen pointed to the readout. "We've been picking up this frequency for the past 20 minutes. 18 hertz. Subsonic. Below the range of human hearing, but the equipment's catching it clear as day." Holloway frowned. 18 hertz was in the infrasound range. The frequency that could make people feel uneasy, anxious, even terrified without knowing why. Churches had been built with organ pipes that produced similar frequencies, supposedly to create a sense of religious awe, but this was different. "Seismic activity," he suggested. "No, sir." Wrong signature entirely. Earthquakes produce a broad spectrum. This is... Chen adjusted the gain on the oscilloscope. "This is precise. Too precise. And it's modulated." "Modulated how?" "Like Morse code, sir, but not quite. There's a pattern. Every 3.7 seconds the frequency dips and rises, then repeats. It's been doing it for 20 minutes without variation." Holloway felt something cold settle in his stomach. Natural phenomena didn't repeat with mechanical precision. "Source direction?" Chen swallowed hard. "That's the problem, sir. According to our equipment, it's coming from below us, approximately 2,000 feet below us." "That's impossible. We're already 600 feet underground." "Yes, sir, I know." They stared at each other in the green light, listening to the absolute silence of the cave. But now, knowing what the equipment was detecting, Holloway could almost feel it. A pressure in his chest, a vibration at the edge of perception. "Pack it up," Holloway said quietly. "We're taking this back to Fort Meade." And Chen, "Sir, don't mention this to anyone outside the team. That's an order." January 1944, Fort Meade, Maryland. The report sat on Colonel Theodore Crane's desk for 3 days before he read it. When he finally did, he read it twice, then locked it in his safe and made a phone call to Washington. Within a week, Project Echo was born. The official designation was Acoustic Intelligence Division Special Research Unit. The official mission was to develop better submarine detection technology. The unofficial mission was to figure out what the hell was making that sound beneath Kentucky, and whether the Germans had somehow built an installation under American soil. Crane assembled a team: geologists, physicists, acoustic engineers, and one very unusual consultant, a machinist from Pennsylvania named Richard Sharp Shaver. Shaver was thin, intense, and completely convinced that he could hear voices through metal. He'd been sending letters to the War Department for months, claiming that when he worked with his welding equipment, the metal would speak to him, transmitting messages about underground civilizations and advanced weapon systems. Most of the brass thought he was insane. But Crane had read those letters carefully. Shaver described hearing low-frequency transmissions, electromagnetic interference, and subsonic pulses, all the things that Holloway's team had detected in Mammoth Cave. "Mr. Shaver," Crane said when they met in a windowless room at Fort Meade, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Can you hear sounds that other people can't?" Shaver's eyes were bright, feverish. I can hear them right now, Colonel. Through the walls, through the floor. They're always there, underneath everything. Most people just don't know how to listen. What do they say? They're not saying anything. Not in English anyway, so it's more like instructions, technical specifications. I've tried to write it all down, but it comes too fast. He pulled a worn notebook from his jacket. I think someone's down there, deep down, and I think they're trying to warn us. Crane took the notebook. The pages were filled with diagrams, equations, and strange linguistic symbols that looked almost like ancient hieroglyphics. But scattered among the apparent madness were acoustic formulas that were technically sound, electromagnetic field calculations that matched classified research, and geological cross-sections that showed remarkable accuracy. Mr. Shaver, how much do you know about subsurface geology? Nothing, sir. I'm a machinist. Then where did you learn this? Crane pointed to a detailed diagram showing limestone cavern systems beneath the Appalachian mountain range. Systems that matched classified USGS surveys that Shaver couldn't possibly have accessed. Shaver leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I told you, Colonel. They told me, the ones below. They call themselves the Tero, and they say there are others down there too. Bad ones. They call them the Dero, the detrimental robots, abandoned machines from an ancient race that are still active, still functional, still broadcasting. Crane closed the notebook slowly. Either Richard Shaver was the most elaborate hoaxer in American history, or he was detecting something real, something that was about to become a matter of national security. Mr. Shaver, how would you like to work for the United States Army? March 1945, Acoustic Intelligence Division, Underground Research Facility. Over the next year, Project Echo expanded rapidly. They installed listening stations in caves across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. They recruited academic geophysicists under the guise of mineral surveys. They developed more sensitive equipment capable of detecting electromagnetic anomalies through solid rock. And they found more signals. The 18 Hz hum wasn't isolated to Mammoth Cave. It appeared in Luray Caverns, Virginia, in Cumberland Caverns, Tennessee, in Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. Always deep, always precise, always modulated in the same pattern. Lieutenant Holloway, now promoted to captain and leading the field research teams, stood in the operations centre studying the map of North America that now bristled with red pins marking detection sites. It's a network, he said to Colonel Crane. Look at the pattern. These aren't random. They form geometric relationships, triangulation points. Crane studied the map. Holloway was right. Connected the detection sites and you got a series of overlapping triangles, all pointing toward three central locations: Mount Shasta in California, the Four Corners region of the Southwest, and somewhere beneath the Appalachian Mountains. What are they pointing at? Crane asked. I don't know yet, sir. But Shaver had an idea. He thinks they're not transmitting to us. He thinks they're transmitting to each other. Communications? Navigation, maybe, or some kind of monitoring system. He compared it to the way submarine hydrophones triangulate position. If these signals are emanating from deep facilities, they might be using the Earth's crust itself as a transmission medium. Crane was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a locked file cabinet and removed a folder marked Eyes Only, Crater Classification. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, Crane said. 3 weeks ago we broke a German cipher transmission. It was incomplete, corrupted, but we got enough. The Nazis were conducting similar research. They called it Ahnenerbe Section Bergwerk, the Ancestral Heritage Mining Section. They were looking for what they called Urtechnology, pre-human technology. He laid out several photographs, aerial reconnaissance of German mountain facilities in Bavaria, partially destroyed by Allied bombing. Among the ruins were exposed tunnel entrances, descending at impossible angles into solid rock. Tunnels were too smooth, too regular to be natural formation. We think Hitler was searching for underground weapons facilities left by some ancient civilization. We thought it was occult nonsense. But now... Crane gestured at the map with its constellation of red pins. Now, I'm not so sure. Holloway felt his mouth go dry. Sir, are you saying that the Germans might have found something? I'm saying that in April of last year, all German transmissions from their Bavarian research sites went silent. Not destroyed. Silent. The last message we intercepted was a single word, repeated 17 times. Hören, German for listen. The two men stared at each other in the fluorescent light of the operations centre, both thinking the same impossible thought. Sir, Holloway said slowly, what if the signal in Kentucky wasn't trying to reach us? What if it was responding to something the Germans activated? Crane picked up the phone on his desk. Get me the Office of Strategic Services, priority clearance. Tell them we need to talk about what we found in Germany. The war in Europe was almost over, but something else, something far older, was just beginning. Act 2. The Shaver Files, 1946 to 1952. June 1946, Chicago, Illinois. Ray Palmer was having the best year of his career, and it was making him deeply nervous. As editor of Amazing Stories magazine, he'd published Richard Shaver's accounts of underground civilizations for the past year. The Shaver Mystery Series. Sales had exploded. Every issue sold out. They were getting thousands of letters from readers claiming they too could hear the voices, that they too had encountered evidence of the underground world. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like being watched. Palmer sat in his cramped office above the print shop, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. No return address. Postmarked Washington, District of Columbia. Inside was a single typed sentence. You are disclosing classified research under the guise of fiction. Cease publication or face federal investigation. Palmer lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He'd suspected for months that Shaver's stories were more than just imagination. The technical details were too accurate. The geological descriptions matched real cave systems. And there were the phone calls, anonymous, threatening, always late at night. A knock at the door made him jump. "It's open," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. A man entered, tall and grey-suited, with the kind of neutral face that you forgot immediately after seeing it. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the careful precision of someone used to being in control. "Mr. Palmer," the man said, not offering his hand. "My name is Robert A. Marsh. I'm a geophysicist with the Army Corps of Engineers." "I don't need any engineering work done," Palmer said, trying for humour and failing. Marsh closed the door behind him. "No, but you need to see something before they make you stop publishing." He opened the briefcase and removed a small black canister. From it he extracted several strips of microfilm and laid them on Palmer's desk. "What is this?" Palmer asked. "Insurance," Marsh said, "and proof." "Look at them." Palmer held the first strip up to the light. It showed a technical diagram, tunnel systems, geometric and precise, cutting through layers of geological strata. At the top of the schematic, in neat military lettering, Terro Access, Point 7A, Mount Shasta Sector. Palmer's hands went numb. Terro. The name Shaver had used for the benevolent underground race in his stories. How? Palmer couldn't finish the sentence. "Your friend Mr. Shaver wasn't making it up," Marsh said quietly. He was describing classified military surveys. "We've known about deep-level anomalies since 1943. The Army has been mapping them, and now certain elements within the government want the whole thing buried, literally and figuratively. Why are you showing me this?" "Because I think the public has a right to know, and because I'm part of a group within the service who believes that what's down there isn't a threat. It's a resource, maybe even a lifeline. But the intelligence agencies are moving to suppress everything. They're going to shut you down, Palmer. But if you move fast, you can get the truth out first." Palmer shuffled through the microfilm strips. There were dozens, cross-sections of underground facilities beneath Mount Shasta, the San Luis Valley in Colorado, a place called Dulce, New Mexico. The diagram showed massive chambers, kilometers deep, with notations about electromagnetic anomalies and structural composition that didn't match known geology. "Why me?" Palmer asked. Marsh smiled slightly. Because you've already been telling the truth disguised as fiction. Keep doing that. Just make sure these images get published. Let people see what their government is hiding." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. There's a reason they're called Tero and Dero in the old texts. It's not made up. It's a military abbreviation. Technical research operations and detrimental research operations. The good ones and the bad ones. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is, which ones did we wake up?" Marsh left, and Palmer sat alone with the microfilm, feeling the weight of something enormous settling onto his shoulders. He began planning the August 1948 issue immediately, the one that would change everything. August 1948. Palmer Publishing, Distribution Crisis. The issue never made it to the newsstands. Palmer had poured everything into it, reproductions of the microfilm images, a serialized exposé framed as speculative fiction, technical diagrams that matched Marsh's intelligence. 50,000 copies were printed, bound and loaded onto distribution trucks. Then came the phone call from the Office of Censorship. "Printing error," they said. "Every copy must be recalled and destroyed. National security matter. You'll be compensated for the loss." Palmer argued. He threatened to go public. He contacted lawyers. 2 days later, federal agents arrived at his office with a warrant. They confiscated the original microfilm, the photographic plates, the printing masters. The trucks returning from distribution were intercepted. All 50,000 copies were pulped. The official reason? Manufacturing defect in the binding adhesive poses a fire hazard. Palmer was ordered to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He refused. A week later, the IRS announced an audit of his publishing company going back 7 years. His bank accounts were frozen. His printer received threats of losing their federal contracts if they continued working with him. Palmer signed the agreement, but he'd kept one thing, a single proof copy of the cover, hidden in a safe deposit box in a bank across state lines. The cover art showed Mount Shasta split open, revealing geometric tunnels beneath. The tagline read, "The truth beneath our feet, a special investigation." He never saw Robert A. Marsh again. When Palmer tried to trace him through the Army Corps of Engineers, he was told no one by that name had ever worked there. Years later, Palmer would learn that Robert Marsh was a known alias used by the Central Intelligence Agency for covert domestic contacts. But by then, it didn't matter. The truth had been buried, and with it, any chance of warning people about what was coming next. Act 3, Operation Shaver, 1953 to 1958. April 1953, Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland. The program officially didn't exist. MKULTRA was born in the paranoid spring of 1953, and while most people would later associate it with LSD experiments and mind control, its earliest research focused on something more subtle, acoustic cognitive disruption. Major Robert Kellerman stood in the observation booth, watching through reinforced glass as the test subject. A volunteer soldier designated Subject 12 sat in the soundproof chamber below. The room was lined with speakers capable of producing frequencies from 5 Hz to 30,000 Hz, well below and above human hearing range. "Begin exposure," Kellerman ordered. The technician engaged the system. Subject 12 wouldn't hear anything. The frequency was 18 Hz, subsonic. But within seconds his behaviour changed. His breathing became rapid. He stood up, looking around the empty chamber with growing agitation. His hands began to shake. Heart rate increasing, the medical observer reported. 90 beats per minute, 100, 110. Subject 12 backed into a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He was experiencing what the researchers called infrasonic panic, the fight-or-flight response triggered not by any visible threat, but by an inaudible frequency. "Terminate exposure," Kellerman said. The frequency stopped. Within minutes, Subject 12's heart rate normalized. When questioned afterward, he reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and presence, as if something malevolent was in the room with him. This wasn't new science, but what interested Kellerman was the source material for the research. A classified file labelled Acoustic Cognitive Disruption Subsurface Frequency Study, which referenced the Shaver letters from 1943. The working theory was elegant. Richard Shaver hadn't been insane. He'd been sensitive to low-frequency electromagnetic interference that most people couldn't consciously detect. The voices he heard were his brain's attempt to interpret subsonic signals as linguistic communication, a kind of auditory pareidolia, like seeing faces in clouds. But there was a problem with that theory. The signals were too organised. November 1956, Nevada test site. The monitoring station at Groom Range was temporary, erected to track seismic disturbances from the nuclear tests in the desert. But the equipment had picked up something that had nothing to do with atomic bombs. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ashworth reviewed the data for the third time, hoping he'd misread it. He hadn't. "Tell me again what I'm looking at," he said to the technician, a young physicist named Bernard. "Subsonic transmission, sir. 18 Hz bass frequency with harmonic overtones. Has been cycling every 11 hours for the past 6 days. Source." Bernard pointed to the seismograph readout. "Beneath us, sir. Approximately 4,000 feet down. But here's the thing. The signal isn't constant. It's modulated, like Morse code. But the pattern doesn't match any known communication protocol." Ashworth felt a chill despite the desert heat outside. He'd heard rumours about the Shaver research. Most officers dismissed it as Cold War paranoia, the intelligence community chasing ghosts. But this? Could it be Soviet? He asked. "No, sir. The signal predates our tests here. We checked the archives. There are seismograph readings from this location going back to 1954 showing the same pattern, long before we established this facility." Ashworth picked up the phone and called Washington. Within hours, Operation Shaver was officially reactivated, and the Nevada site became ground zero for what would eventually become Area 51, though its purpose had nothing to do with aircraft. They were listening, and whatever was below, it was speaking. December 1958. Classified research memo. The memo that crossed CIA Director Alan Dulles' desk was brief and terrifying in its implications. Subject: Operation Shaver, Nevada Subsurface Analysis. Classification: Crater. Summary: Continuous monitoring of subsurface signals beneath Groom Range facility confirms artificial source. Signal characteristics inconsistent with Soviet technology or natural geological phenomena. Pattern analysis suggests encrypted communication using Earth's crust as transmission medium. Recommendation: expand monitoring to additional sites identified in 1943 Project Echo survey. Establish permanent underground listening facility. Designate operation highest classification level. Concern: if signals represent active pre-human technology as theorized, strategic implications require immediate executive briefing. Unknown capability level, unknown intent, unknown. Whether signals represent surveillance, communication, or targeting data. Addendum: subject Richard Shaver, deceased October 1958. Cause: undetermined. Autopsy showed unusual calcification in auditory nerve tissue. Pathologist noted, never seen anything like this. Dulles initiated the executive briefing. The facility that would become Area 51 was authorised not to study flying saucers, but to monitor the voice of something far older, speaking from miles beneath the American desert. And the question that nobody could answer: was it talking to us or calling someone else? Act 4. The Phoenix Caves, 1962 to 1971. March 1962, Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. The excavation of NORAD's underground command center was the most ambitious military construction project of the Cold War era. Tunneling into Cheyenne Mountain to create a nuclear-proof facility required moving millions of tons of granite, drilling through solid rock at depths that had never been attempted. And on March 17, 1962, the drill crew broke through into something impossible. Site engineer Thomas Rourke stood at the edge of the void, his flashlight beam disappearing into absolute darkness. The chamber they'd exposed was enormous, at least 200 feet in diameter, with walls that reflected light like polished metal. "Cut the drill," he ordered. The pneumatic shriek of the boring machine ceased, leaving only the sound of dripping water and the breathing of the 6-man crew. "What the hell is this?" Foreman Jack Lynch whispered. Rourke approached the wall, reaching out to touch it. The surface was smooth, seamless, and when he tapped it with his knuckle it rang like a bell, a pure, sustained tone that seemed to resonate through the rock itself. "This isn't natural," Rourke said. "Get the lights down here. All of them." And when they rigged the portable generators and flooded the chamber with light, the full scope of what they'd found became clear. The chamber wasn't just smooth, it was geometrically perfect. A sphere, carved or formed from the living rock, with a precision that seemed impossible. And leading away from it, both up and down into the darkness, were tunnels. Not carved roughly like mines, but machined. Their walls showed tool marks, but the marks were strange. Spiralling patterns like nothing Rourke had seen in 30 years of mining. Sir, look at this," one of the crew called from the far side of the chamber. Rourke made his way across the smooth floor. The man was pointing to a section of wall where the metal surface seemed to have cracked or corroded. Beneath it was another layer. Not rock, but something organic-looking, almost fossilised, with patterns that resembled circuitry or neural tissue. Rourke's hands were shaking as he took photographs. This was beyond his pay grade, beyond anyone's pay grade. "Nobody talks about this," he said to his crew. "Not to your families, not to other workers, not to anyone, understand?" They nodded, but Rourke could see the fear in their eyes. They all felt it. The same sensation that the test subjects in Edgewood had reported. The sense of presence, of being watched. 3 days later, 2 members of the crew, Michael Torres and James Beckman, volunteered for a survey mission deeper into the tunnel system. They descended on ropes with radio equipment and battery lamps, their voices crackling back to the surface team. "Tunnel extends at least 500 feet down," Torres reported. "The walls, they're warm. I can feel heat through my gloves." "Any sign of where it leads?" Rourke asked. "Negative, just keeps going." "Wait, static." "Sir, there's something down here. Some kind of..." The radio shrieked with feedback, a piercing whine that made everyone in the command tent rip off their headsets. When they got the channel clear, Torres and Beckman were gone. The rescue team that descended found their equipment, radios, lamps, rope harnesses, all neatly stacked at the bottom of the measured shaft. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. But scratched into the metallic wall in letters 6 inches high was a single word in Spanish. Escucha. Listen. June 1963. Army Corps of Engineers report, classified. Subject: Cheyenne Mountain Anomaly, Subterranean Sector. PH3. Classification: Beyond Crater. Incident Summary. During excavation operations for NORAD facility, construction crews exposed pre-existing void system of apparent artificial origin. Subsequent exploration resulted in loss of 2 personnel under circumstances that remain unexplained. Structural analysis. Chamber walls demonstrate machined precision beyond current human capability. Material composition analysis shows layered structure inconsistent with natural geological formation. X-ray crystallography reveals organised metallic lattices suggesting manufactured origin. Geophysical assessment. Magnetic flux readings within chamber show anomalous variations, plus or minus 47 milligauss over 3-foot distances. EM spectrum analysis detects low-level radiation in ULF range, cycling at 18.07 Hz, identical to frequencies documented in Project Echo, 1943, and Operation Shaver, 1953-58. Recommendation: seal chamber and reroute excavation. Designate site as subterranean sector. PH3, Phoenix 3. Limit access to crater-cleared personnel only. Addendum. Recovered equipment from missing personnel shows unusual degradation. Radio components exhibit molecular restructuring consistent with exposure to intense electromagnetic fields. Rope fibers show protein denaturation typically seen in thermal decomposition, despite no evidence of heat exposure. Conclusion. Structure predates human civilization. Origin and purpose unknown. Recommend establishment of continuous monitoring program and interdiction of any civilian archaeological interest in region. Final note: scratched message recovered from site escucha, submitted for linguistic analysis. Word is Spanish for listen or hear, but usage suggests imperative form, a command or warning. The report was filed, classified beyond the highest levels, and the chamber was sealed behind 8 feet of reinforced concrete. NORAD was built over it, literally constructing America's nuclear command center on top of something that couldn't be explained or controlled. And deep in the sealed darkness, every 11 hours something continued to transmit. Act 4. The Quiet Years, 1972 to 1982. July 1975, Washington District of Columbia. When CIA Director William Colby testified before the Senate Select Committee about the Phoenix program in Vietnam, nobody noticed the single blacked-out paragraph in the middle of page 47. The paragraph was labelled PH3 Incident Continuing, and the senators who had clearance to read the unredacted version never asked about it publicly. Those who did ask privately were told it referred to a separate matter of ongoing national security concern, unrelated to the Vietnam operations. But buried in the classified annexes was a memo from 1963, referencing Project Phoenix Caves and the discoveries at Cheyenne Mountain. The connection was deliberate. Someone wanted the Phoenix program testimony to serve as a breadcrumb, a hidden thread for future investigators to follow. That someone was likely Robert Kellerman, the Air Force major who'd overseen the early MKULTRA acoustic research and had been present at the Cheyenne Mountain excavation. He'd watched the government bury the truth for decades, and as he aged into retirement, his conscience had begun to trouble him. He couldn't tell the truth directly, but he could leave clues. November the 1980, United States Geological Survey, Western Regional Office. The seismic mapping program seemed routine, a federal survey using new deep harmonic resonance technology to map fault lines and mineral deposits across the western states. Geophysicist Karen Wu led the Mount Shasta survey team, installing a network of sensors to measure subsurface density and composition. The data they collected should have been mundane. Instead, it was impossible. "Run it again," Wu told her assistant, staring at the computer readout. "There has to be a calibration error." They ran it again, same results. Every 11 hours, precisely timed, a harmonic pulse emanated from a point approximately 9 miles beneath Mount Shasta. The frequency signature was mechanical, too regular, too precise to be seismic or volcanic. The pulse lasted exactly 17 seconds, then ceased. 11 hours later, it repeated. Wu cross-referenced the data with historical seismic records. The pattern had been present, unnoticed, in survey data going back to 1954. For 26 years, something deep beneath Mount Shasta had been broadcasting a signal, and nobody had been paying attention. She wrote up her findings and submitted them to USGS headquarters. 3 weeks later, her entire project was reclassified under Department of Energy jurisdiction, citing nuclear subsurface interest. All her data was confiscated, her team was disbanded, and she was reassigned to a desk job in Maryland, mapping earthquake risk in the Atlantic seaboard, about as far from Mount Shasta as she could get, while staying in the continental United States. But Wu kept copies. She always kept copies. March 1982, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Helen Worth had been an engineer at the Cheyenne Mountain facility for 19 years, long enough to earn the trust that came with institutional memory. She'd been there during the original construction, had heard the stories about the sealed chambers, had seen the classified reports that referenced non-human structural geometry. Now, dying of cancer with perhaps 6 months to live, she decided the truth mattered more than secrecy. She smuggled out photographs. Not many, just 3, taken during the brief window in 1963 before the Phoenix chamber was sealed. The images showed the metallic sphere that had been extracted from one of the branch tunnels, a perfect black orb approximately 3 feet in diameter, with a surface that seemed to absorb light. The photographs also captured the spectroscopic analysis results, showing an alloy composition that didn't match any terrestrial material. Some of the trace isotopes resembled samples from the Allende meteorite. Others matched nothing in the reference database. Worth contacted a journalist, arranged a meeting, and prepared to testify about what the government had found beneath Cheyenne Mountain. She never made it to the meeting. On March 28, 1982, her car left the road on a clear, dry evening with perfect visibility. The crash site was examined by local police, who found no evidence of mechanical failure, no alcohol in her system, no reason for her to have lost control on a straight stretch of highway she'd driven 1,000 times. The photographs she'd stolen were never recovered. Her house was burgled the night of her death, but nothing was taken except a locked filing cabinet in her home office. The journalist who'd planned to meet her received an anonymous call the next day. A man's voice, calm and professional. Helen Worth died in a tragic accident. We know she contacted you. We know you're curious. Here's some advice. Stay curious about other things. The journalist took the advice. December 1982. Epilogue in the dark. Major Robert Kellerman, now retired, living in a modest house in Vermont, received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, the black sphere from Cheyenne Mountain, sitting on a laboratory bench. Written on the back in handwriting he recognised as Helen Worth's. They're listening to us. We should be listening back. Kellerman burned the photograph in his fireplace and poured himself a drink. He was 73 years old, and he'd kept the secret for 40 years. But the secret was bigger than him, bigger than all of them. The truth was simple and terrifying. In 1943, America had detected a signal from deep underground. In 1962, they'd found the source, or one of them. And for 40 years, the government had been trying to pretend it didn't exist. But existence doesn't require acknowledgement. The signal continued, regular as clockwork, every 11 hours. The chambers remained, sealed behind concrete and classification, and somewhere beneath Mount Shasta, beneath the Nevada desert, beneath the mountains of Colorado, something ancient and inexplicable was still active, still transmitting, still waiting. Epilogue, the document, present day. January 2024. National Archives, declassification release. The document appeared without fanfare in a routine declassification release, part of the ongoing process of making Cold War-era research papers available to the public. Most of the releases were mundane, budget reports, personnel files, mundane correspondence. But buried among them was a thin file labelled Project Echo, Acoustic Intelligence Division, Special Research Unit, 1943 to 1946. Graduate student Marcus Chen found it while researching his dissertation on World War II surveillance technology. At first, it seemed like exactly what it claimed to be, research into submarine detection using cave acoustics. But the final page caught his attention. It referenced a suppressed appendix designated Appendix R, subharmonic resonance signatures detected beneath continental shelf. The appendix itself was not included in the release. Instead, there was a note. Material continues to be classified under crater protocols. Expected declassification, 2043. 100 years. They were keeping it secret for 100 years. But the final line of the release document was visible, stamped in faded red ink. Source localization indeterminate. However, pattern repetition suggests intelligent modulation. Frequency, 18.07 Hz. Recommendation, continuous monitoring required. Chen stared at those words for a long time. Then he did what any good researcher would do. He started cross-referencing. He found Karen Wu's name in a 1980 USGS report about Mount Shasta seismic surveys, a report that had been partially redacted but was now available. He found references to Project Phoenix in declassified Air Force budget documents. He found Richard Shaver's letters in the FBI archives, complete with bureau notes dismissing them as the ravings of a paranoid schizophrenic. But he also found something else, a geophysics paper published just 6 months earlier by a team at Stanford University. They'd been studying naturally occurring infrasound in volcanic regions and had detected something unusual beneath Mount Shasta. A harmonic pulse, 18 Hz, repeating every 11 hours. The researchers had noted it as an unexplained geophysical phenomenon, possibly related to deep magma chamber resonance, but had recommended further study. Chen pulled up the raw data from their public research repository. The signal was still there, still broadcasting, still precise as a heartbeat. 81 years after Lieutenant Holloway first heard it in Mammoth Cave, the echo was still sounding. March 2024, Mount Shasta, California. Chen made the drive from Berkeley on a cloudy spring morning, bringing portable seismic monitoring equipment borrowed from the University Geology Department. He hiked to a remote location on the mountain's northern slope where the Stanford team had placed their sensors. He set up his equipment and waited. At exactly 2:47 p.m, his laptop screen lit up with activity. The seismograph showed a clear pulse, 18 hertz, subsonic, lasting 17 seconds. His electromagnetic field detector registered a corresponding spike, and his audio recorder, running through frequency-shifting software to make the infrasound audible, captured something that made his skin crawl. It wasn't random. When shifted up into the audible range and played back, the pattern had structure, rhythm, almost like... Chen played it again, slowing it down, analysing the wave patterns. It was language, or something like language. A signal that carried information, repeating the same message over and over across decades, perhaps across centuries. He sat on the mountainside as the sun set, watching his equipment record cycle after cycle, the ancient transmission, still broadcasting from miles beneath his feet. And then Chen made a decision. He packed up his equipment, drove back to Berkeley, and wrote the most important paper of his life. He included everything. Project Echo, the Shaver letters, the Cheyenne Mountain discoveries, Karen Wu's data, and his own recordings. He cited every declassified document, every piece of evidence that was now part of the public record. He titled it, The Echo Below, Evidence for Subsurface Artificial Signal Transmission Beneath Western North America, 1943 to present. He submitted it to the Journal of Geophysical Research. It was rejected within 48 hours. Insufficient peer review of extraordinary claims. He submitted it to 3 more journals, all rejected. Finally, he posted it to the public preprint archive where anyone could read it for free. Within a week, it had been downloaded 50,000 times. Within a month, amateur researchers across the western United States were setting up monitoring stations. Within 6 months, the data was undeniable. The signal was real, it was artificial, and it had been broadcasting for at least 80 years. The government issued no comment, but funding for deep seismic research suddenly increased dramatically. New listening stations appeared near Mount Shasta, near the Four Corners region, near the Appalachian Mountains, all the places that Project Echo had identified in 1943. They were still listening, still trying to understand. The final truth. Here is what we know, stripped of speculation. In 1943, the United States military detected an artificial signal from deep underground. The signal was precise, repetitive, and unexplainable by natural geology. For 80 years, various agencies tried to understand, suppress, and contain this information. People died, careers were destroyed, documents were buried, but the signal never stopped. Today, with modern equipment and freed from Cold War secrecy, we can confirm that something beneath the western United States is transmitting. It has been transmitting since at least World War II. It may have been transmitting for thousands of years before that, waiting for someone with the right technology to listen. We don't know what it is. We don't know who built it. We don't know what the message says. But we know it's there. Richard Shaver wasn't crazy. The Terror and Dera weren't fantasy. Project Echo wasn't paranoia. They were all pieces of a truth too large for any single conspiracy to contain. That beneath our feet in the deep places of the earth something is speaking. And now, finally, we're listening back. The question isn't whether the echo's real, and the question is, what happens when we learn what it's saying? And the even more terrifying question, what happens when it realizes we can finally hear it? This story is built on a foundation of real history. Richard S. Shaver was a real person who wrote to the government and to pulp magazines about underground civilizations. Project Echo and similar acoustic research programs existed during World War II. MKULTRA really did conduct acoustic warfare research. The Cheyenne Mountain facility really was built in the 1960s, and declassified documents do reference geological anomalies encountered during construction. The signal beneath Mount Shasta, the 18 Hz pulse broadcasting every 11 hours, that's where documented history ends and speculation begins. But here's what keeps me awake at night. In a 2019 geophysics paper, researchers really did detect an unexplained harmonic resonance beneath Mount Shasta. They called it a geological phenomenon and moved on. Maybe they were right. Or maybe, like Lieutenant Holloway in that Kentucky cave in 1943, they heard something real and chose not to ask the next question. The truth is often buried, but it's never silent. Keep listening. What if the greatest secret on Earth wasn't hidden among the stars, but buried beneath our feet for billions of years? What if we never discovered it? We just accidentally woke it up? Before we dive into today's story, I want to give a massive thank you to Jeff Anon and so many others who suggested this incredible premise. Your ideas keep this channel alive, and I'm constantly blown away by your creativity. If you have story ideas you'd like to see brought to life, drop them in the comments below. Now, let's descend into the zone of silence and uncover what should have stayed buried. Part 1. The Fall, July 11, 1970. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Voss learned that truth the hard way as his boots hit the scorched earth of northern Mexico, 50 miles south of the Texas border. The air shimmered with heat, warping the horizon into a liquid mirage. Around him, the Mapami Desert stretched in every direction. Endless, hostile, and utterly silent. Too silent. "Colonel, we've got the coordinates locked," said Sergeant Hayes, squinting at a handheld GPS unit that looked absurdly modern against the ancient landscape. 2 clicks northwest. But sir, the locals are already talking. Word travels fast out here. Voss nodded, adjusting the brim of his cap against the brutal sun. They'd landed 3 helicopters 20 minutes ago, 2 Hueys and a Chinook, ostensibly for a routine recovery operation after an Athena RTV missile went off course during a test launch from Green River, Utah. The official story was clean: malfunction, trajectory error, harmless debris scattered across uninhabited desert. The truth was considerably more complicated. "Get the perimeter established," Voss ordered. "No locals inside 500 meters. Tell them it's radiation protocol. And Hayes? Sir? Make sure the science team stays close. Whatever we're pulling out of that crater, I want it documented, catalogued, and on a transport back to Los Alamos before sunset." Hayes saluted and jogged toward the waiting convoy. Voss turned his attention to the plume of dark smoke rising from the northwest, the impact site. According to telemetry, the Athena missile had carried standard test payloads, inert warheads, atmospheric sensors, nothing exotic. But 3 separate tracking stations had registered an anomaly in the final 30 seconds before impact. A second object. Something had been travelling alongside the missile, matching its trajectory with impossible precision, before both slammed into the desert floor at terminal velocity. Voss had read the classified brief twice during the flight from Kirtland Air Force Base. He still didn't believe it. Satellites didn't just appear out of nowhere, and they certainly didn't manoeuvre without propulsion signatures. 20 minutes later, he stood at the edge of the crater. It was wrong. Craters from missile impacts followed predictable patterns. Circular depressions, radial debris fields, scorched earth in concentric rings. This crater looked like something had been extracted from the ground rather than driven into it. The walls were smooth, almost glassy, with a faint iridescence that reminded Voss of oil on water. At the centre lay twisted fragments of the Athena missile. Recognisable alloy panels, shattered guidance systems, a crumpled fuel tank, and something else. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Fisher, the team's metallurgist. He knelt beside a piece of debris that didn't belong. It was roughly the size of a car door, curved like a section of hull, but the metal was unlike anything Voss had seen. Smooth as polished obsidian, dark grey, with threads of crystalline material running through it like veins. Where sunlight struck the surface, faint geometric patterns seemed to pulse just beneath. Fisher reached out with a gloved hand. "Don't touch it!" Voss snapped. "Sir, I'm just... Don't touch it." Fisher pulled back. They all heard it then, a sound so low it was more felt than heard, a subsonic hum that resonated in their chests and made their teeth ache. 18 cycles per second, Voss would learn later. The exact frequency that triggers primal fear in human neurology. "Get the containment team down here now," Voss said quietly, "and somebody find me the Mexican liaison. We're going to need official cooperation to keep this quiet." That liaison turned out to be Arturo Salazar, a geophysicist from the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León. He arrived 3 hours later in a battered Land Cruiser, accompanied by 2 graduate students and an expression of barely concealed irritation. "Colonel Voss?" Salazar extended a hand. He was in his late 40s, lean and weathered, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I was told this was a routine recovery." "The crater suggests otherwise." Voss gestured toward the site. "We're securing hazardous materials. Standard protocol?" "Standard protocol involves the International Atomic Energy Agency and transparent communication with host nations," Salazar replied, his English crisp and unaccented. "What I see here is an American military operation on Mexican soil with no oversight and no explanation." "You'll have your explanation once we understand what we're dealing with." "Then let me help you understand." Salazar shouldered past Voss and descended into the crater before anyone could stop him. He knelt beside the strange metallic debris, studying it with the focused intensity of a man who'd spent his career reading secrets from rock and soil. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. "This isn't from your missile," he said finally. "What makes you say that?" Salazar pointed to the crystalline veins threading through the metal. "See these structures? They're not manufactured. They're grown. Dendritic formations consistent with slow crystallization over geological timescales. And the base metal," he leaned closer, "nickel-iron matrix, but the grain structure is wrong. Too regular. Too perfect." "Meaning?" "Meaning this is either the most sophisticated manufacturing process ever developed, or it's not manufactured at all." Salazar looked up at Voss. "Where did your missile actually come from, Colonel?" "Utah." "No, I mean what was it carrying?" Voss hesitated. The brief had been explicit. Total information security. But standing in that impossible crater, watching the Mexican scientist piece together conclusions that matched his own worst suspicions, he made a calculation. According to radar, nothing, Voss admitted, but according to 3 separate tracking stations, something was travelling in formation with the Athena for the last 30 seconds of flight. Salazar stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "Then you've made a very significant discovery, Colonel. And if you're smart, you'll let me help you understand it before someone else does." They worked through the afternoon, carefully extracting fragments of the anomalous debris. Each piece hummed with that same subsonic frequency, and each piece displayed properties that violated basic materials science. The metal was room temperature despite sitting in direct desert sun. It was non-magnetic, yet compasses spun wildly within 10 meters. And when Fisher finally ran a spectrographic analysis, his hands trembled as he showed Voss the results. "Sir, the isotope ratios don't match anything in our database. Not Russian, not Chinese, not even theoretical experimental alloys." "So where did it come from?" Fisher met his eyes. "I don't know. But Colonel, The decay signatures suggest an age of at least 3 billion years. The words hung in the superheated air. "That's impossible," Voss said automatically. "Yes, sir, it is." By sunset, they'd loaded 17 fragments onto the Chinook, each piece secured in lead-lined cases despite showing no radioactivity. Voss posted armed guards around the perimeter and ordered the crater filled and graded by morning. Official story: recovered missile components, minor fuel contamination, area cleared. But Arturo Salazar had already pocketed a small fragment, no larger than his thumb, while Voss's team focused on the larger pieces. He'd seen the fear in the colonel's eyes, heard the tremor in Fisher's voice. Whatever this was, the Americans would classify it, bury it, and deny it ever existed. Salazar was a scientist. He believed in evidence. 2 days later, he delivered the fragment to a colleague at the Instituto Tecnológico in Monterrey with a simple request: full isotopic analysis, crystallographic structure, and complete discretion. The results came back on July 19, 1970. Composition: nickel-iron lattice with embedded crystalline silicon structures. Radiometric dating: 3.2 billion years, plus or minus 50 million. Crystalline symmetry: unknown. Not hexagonal, not cubic. Something else, something impossible. The lab technician who processed the sample noted one final detail in her report. When exposed to electromagnetic fields, the crystalline structures appeared to grow, extending microscopic filaments through the surrounding metal like roots seeking soil. On July 21st, the Monterrey laboratory suffered a catastrophic electrical fire. The building was a total loss. All samples and records were destroyed. On July 23rd, Arturo Salazar boarded a small commercial flight from Monterrey to Durango. The plane never arrived. Official cause: engine failure over mountainous terrain. No survivors. Wreckage recovered after a 3-day search showed clear signs of mechanical failure, a fractured fuel line, possibly due to improper maintenance. Colonel Voss received the news while reviewing preliminary reports at Los Alamos. He read the accident summary twice, then locked it in his safe alongside the growing file labelled Project Echo Dust. He didn't believe in coincidences, not anymore. Part 2. The Pattern. April 2024. Mara Delaney discovered the impossible on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in a dataset that should have been routine. She'd been at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena for 6 years, specialising in atmospheric particulate analysis, the unglamorous work of studying dust, specifically the microscopic debris that rained down from space every day, micrometeorites, ablated satellite fragments, cosmic dust from the solar system's formation. Most of it burned up in the upper atmosphere. The rest settled slowly to Earth, where high-altitude balloons collected samples for researchers like Mara to analyse. It was meticulous work. It required patience, precision, and a tolerance for tedium that bordered on pathological. Mara excelled at it. She was processing sample cluster 014C, collected by a weather balloon over northern Mexico in March, when the mass spectrometer results stopped making sense. "That can't be right," she muttered, leaning closer to her monitor. The isotope ratios were completely anomalous, not just unusual, fundamentally wrong. The nickel-iron signature matched carbonaceous chondrites, ancient meteorites from the solar system's formation, but the crystalline structures were far too complex, too ordered. She ran the analysis again, same results. A third time, same results. Mara pulled up NASA's open-source meteorite database and ran a comparison algorithm. No matches. She expanded the search to include university collections, private research institutes, and international databases. Still nothing. She sat back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. It was past 7 in the evening, and the lab was empty except for the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional ping of automated instruments. Outside her window, the lights of Pasadena glittered against the darkening San Gabriel Mountains. On impulse, she accessed the restricted archive, the classified collection of samples and data sets that required special clearance. She technically had access, inherited from a previous project studying satellite re-entry debris, though she rarely used it. The database was massive, poorly organised, and mostly contained decades-old Cold War military data that nobody had bothered to declassify. She entered the isotope ratios from sample 014C and hit search. One result. The file name made her pause. Echo Dust. Origin. 1970. Athena Retrieval Zone. Access restricted per Department of Defense Directive 1547. Mara clicked it. Access denied. Authorization required. She tried her credentials. Nothing. She tried her supervisor's credentials, which she technically wasn't supposed to have. Nothing. She tried the lab director's credentials, which she definitely wasn't supposed to have. The file opened. What she found inside would change everything. The document was a scanned report typed on an actual typewriter, dated September 14th, 1970. The classification header read, Top Secret, Jusgel, Special Access Required, Project Echo Dust, Summary of Preliminary Analysis. Subject, Debris recovered from Mapimi impact site, 11th July 1970. Recovered materials consist of 17 distinct fragments, ranging from 0.3 kilograms to 47.2 kilograms. All fragments display consistent composition and structural properties inconsistent with known terrestrial or meteoritic origins. Key findings: 1. Composition, nickel-iron matrix, 73% nickel, 24% iron, 3% unknown crystalline structures. 2. Age. Radiometric dating indicates formation 3.2 plus or minus 0.05 billion years before present. 3. Structure. Embedded crystalline formations display non-natural geometric symmetry. Preliminary crystallography suggests organized growth patterns inconsistent with inorganic processes. 4. Electromagnetic properties. All fragments emit low-frequency electromagnetic radiation in VLF range, 18 Hz baseline with periodic modulation. Frequency correlates with ambient geomagnetic field strength. 5. Anomalous behavior. When subjected to varying electromagnetic fields, crystalline structures demonstrate apparent growth. Rate of growth, approximately 0.03 mm per hour under laboratory conditions. Growth ceases when EM field is removed. Recommendation: continue analysis under Level 4 containment protocols. Minimize personnel exposure. Monitor for behavioral or psychological effects related to VLF radiation exposure. Mara read the report 3 times. Each time her hands shook a little more. Growth. The thing had grown. She scrolled through attached documents, dozens of them, spanning from 1970 to 1982. Lab reports, incident summaries, personnel evaluations. Each one added another layer of impossibility. In March 1971, researchers noted that the fragments appeared to communicate with each other. When separated by more than 50 meters, they fell silent. When brought together, the 18 Hz frequency strengthened and developed complex modulation patterns. In August 1972, a technician reported hearing voices near the containment chamber. Not audible sounds, but sensations of words just below the threshold of consciousness. Psychological evaluation, no evidence of mental illness. Recommendation: reduce exposure time. In February 1973, 2 senior researchers committed suicide within a week of each other. No suicide notes, no warning signs. Both had been working directly with the largest fragment. Project Echo Dust was terminated on March 15th, 1973. All materials were transferred to secure storage location designated Site 77. All personnel were reassigned. All documentation was reclassified under Atomic Energy Commission oversight and buried in the archives. The final document in the file was a handwritten memo, barely legible. These fragments are not debris from a satellite or weapon. They're seeds. Whatever they're part of, it's still out there. Still growing. And now it knows we found it. Recommend immediate termination of all research and permanent isolation of samples. Ellis Hawthorne, Senior Analyst. Mara closed the file and stared at her monitor. Her mouth was dry. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about sample 014-C, collected 54 years after the original fragments. Same isotope signature, same crystalline structures. The thing was still out there, still spreading. She needed more data. Over the next week, Mara worked in secret, using access credentials she'd borrowed, stolen, if she was being honest, from colleagues. She pulled atmospheric sample data from every collection site within 1,000 kilometres of the Mapimi Desert. 30 years of data, hundreds of samples. And she found the pattern. Every sample collected within 500 kilometres of the Zone of Silence, the local name for the Mapimi impact region, showed trace amounts of the anomalous material. Not much, just a few particles per cubic metre of air, but enough to confirm that whatever had crashed in 1970 hadn't stayed buried. It was in the dust, in the air. Microscopic fragments carried on the wind, settling across northern Mexico and southern Texas. Mara cross-referenced the data with global geomagnetic records from NOAA. Whenever a magnetic storm struck, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, anything that disrupted Earth's magnetic field, the particulate concentration spiked, as if the material was responding to the magnetic disruption, or being activated by it. She found something else too, something that made her skin crawl. The Zone of Silence had a twin, actually several twins. She plotted every major electromagnetic anomaly on Earth, regions where compasses misbehaved, where radio signals failed, where the magnetic field displayed inexplicable variations, the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea off Japan, the Sargasso Sea, a region in southern Africa called the Mozambique Channel. And when she overlaid them on a map, they formed a pattern. Not random, not natural, geometric, symmetrical, deliberate, a global network. Mara sat alone in the empty lab at 3 a.m, staring at the map on her screen. The implications crashed over her like a wave. Whatever had crashed in 1970 wasn't an isolated event. It was part of something larger, something ancient, something that had been here long before humans, buried deep in the Earth's crust, dormant for billions of years. And 54 years ago, a missile from Utah had accidentally woken it up. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking into echo dust. This is your only warning." Mara's hands went cold. She looked around the empty lab, suddenly aware of how isolated she was. The building was silent except for the hum of machinery. The windows reflected only darkness. She shut down her computer, grabbed her bag and left, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Part 3. The Missing Experiment, 1971 to 1982. Mara spent the next 3 days at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., digging through declassified documents from the Atomic Energy Commission. Most of it was useless. Dry bureaucratic records of budget allocations, personnel transfers, safety inspections. But buried among the mundane paperwork, she found fragments of Project Echo Dust. Not the full story, just pieces, enough to reconstruct what had happened. After the 1970 crash, the recovered fragments had been transported to Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. A joint US-Mexican research team was assembled under the leadership of Ellis Hawthorne, a materials scientist with clearance for nuclear weapons research. The official cover story, Analysis of Ablated Satellite Debris to Improve Re-entry Shield Technology. The real work was far stranger. Hawthorne's team discovered that the fragments weren't passive objects, they were reactive. When exposed to electromagnetic fields, particularly low-frequency fields in the VLF range, the crystalline structures began to grow, extending microscopic filaments through the surrounding metal like neural networks. The growth was slow but relentless. Under laboratory conditions, a single fragment could double in size over 6 months, and the growth was purposeful. When separated, fragments would orient their growth toward each other, as if seeking connection. When brought together, they would fuse seamlessly, their crystalline structures interweaving until the boundary between them disappeared. Hawthorne theorized that the fragments were part of a larger structure, a distributed network designed to self-assemble, given sufficient time and energy. But the most disturbing discovery came from the VLF monitoring. The fragments emitted a constant low-frequency hum at 18 Hz, a frequency known to induce fear, anxiety and disorientation in humans. But the signal wasn't constant. It modulated. It changed patterns based on external stimuli, magnetic field fluctuations, seismic activity, even the presence of nearby electronic equipment. One researcher described it as almost conversational. In August 1972, Hawthorne authorised an experiment. They isolated the largest fragment in a shielded chamber and exposed it to a series of electromagnetic pulses designed to mimic natural geomagnetic fluctuations. The fragment responded, not just with growth, but with what could only be described as communication. The VLF signal developed complex patterns, rhythmic pulses that repeated in sequences, varied in duration, displayed what appeared to be syntactic structure. Hawthorne recorded over 40 hours of signal data before the experiment was terminated. He never published the results. Mara found his notes in a misfiled folder labelled Equipment Calibration Tests 1972. They were handwritten, barely legible, and increasingly frantic. August 14th. The signal patterns are not random. Statistical analysis confirms non-random distribution of pulse sequences. Probability of natural occurrence, less than 0.00001%. August 19th. We've identified repeating sequences that correspond to geomagnetic variations. It's tracking the Earth's magnetic field in real time. How? August 23rd. 2 technicians reported auditory hallucinations near the containment chamber. Both describe hearing whispers just below conscious perception. Psychological eval shows no prior history of mental illness. August 29th. I'm hearing them too, not words exactly, more like impressions, concepts. It's trying to communicate. September 3rd. I understand now. It's not trying to communicate with us. It's trying to communicate to something else. The fragments aren't debris, they're transmitters. The notes ended there. 3 weeks later, the lab reported its first unexplained incident. A catastrophic power failure that knocked out all systems for 47 minutes. When power was restored, the containment chamber was empty. Not broken open, not damaged, just empty. The fragment was found 2 days later, 17 metres away, in a sub-basement that had been sealed since the 1950s. There was no way for it to have gotten there. The containment doors had never been opened. The seals were intact. It had simply moved. Hawthorne's final memo, dated March 12th, 1973, was a single sentence. We need to stop. Now. Project Echo Dust was terminated 3 days later, but Mara found one more document. A transfer order dated April 1973, authorising the movement of all recovered materials to Site 77, Nevada Test Range. She'd never heard of Site 77. It didn't appear in any official documentation, not in the Atomic Energy Commission records, not in Department of Defense facility listings, not anywhere. As far as the official record was concerned, Site 77 didn't exist, which meant the fragments had been buried so deep, so completely, that even the people who'd buried them wanted to forget where. Mara flew back to Pasadena and returned to her lab. She had a theory now, a terrifying, impossible theory that explained everything. She just needed one more piece of proof. Part 4. The signal returns. The proof came from NOAA. Mara spent an entire weekend downloading geomagnetic field data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Global Sensor Network. The data went back decades. Continuous monitoring of Earth's magnetic field from hundreds of stations worldwide. She focused on the zone of silence and surrounding regions, and she found it. A signal. Faint, irregular, but undeniably present. Every time a geomagnetic storm struck, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, anything that disturbed Earth's magnetic field, the zone of silence emitted a pulse of VLF radiation, the same 18 Hz frequency documented in 1970. But there was more. The signal had a structure. Mara fed it through pattern recognition algorithms designed to detect artificial signals in radio astronomy data. The same tools SETI used to search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The results came back positive. Non-random, intentional, repeating, and the signal was growing stronger. In 1975, the pulses occurred only during major geomagnetic storms, perhaps once or twice a year. By 1990, they occurred monthly. By 2010, weekly. Now in 2024, they occurred daily. Whatever was buried beneath the zone of silence was waking up. Mara plotted the signal sources on a map. The zone of silence was the epicenter, but secondary signals appeared from the other electromagnetic anomaly zones she'd identified. The Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea, the Mozambique Channel. They were all active now, all synchronized. She zoomed in on the zone of silence and overlaid satellite imagery. The desert looked unchanged, barren, empty, lifeless. But when she applied infrared filtering, something emerged. A pattern in the sand, geometric, hexagonal, extending for hundreds of meters beneath the surface. Not a pattern in the sand, a pattern of the sand. The ground itself had been reorganized into crystalline structures too large to see from the ground, visible only from space, like the fragments from 1970, scaled up to geological proportions. Mara's hands shook as she zoomed closer. At the centre of the pattern, precisely where the 1970 crash occurred, the structure was denser, darker, as if the material had concentrated there, drawing itself together, growing. She pulled radio telescope data from the Very Large Array in New Mexico. The VLA monitored radio emissions across a broad spectrum, including the VLF range where the echo dust signal appeared. And there it was, a transmission, faint but clear, originating from the zone of silence. Not continuous, it pulsed in bursts lasting exactly 1.7 seconds, repeated every 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Mara isolated the signal and ran it through a binary decoder. The output made her stomach drop. 010110110101010101001. She converted it to ASCII. Where? The word appeared on her screen in stark black letters. Where? Not a statement. A question. Something was asking. Mara sat in her silent apartment staring at her laptop screen until dawn. Outside, Los Angeles stirred to life. Traffic, voices, the mundane rhythm of a city waking. Inside, she grappled with a truth that made the world feel suddenly fragile. 54 years ago, humanity had accidentally disturbed something ancient and vast. Something that predated civilization, predated humanity, possibly predated life itself on Earth. It had been dormant for billions of years, buried deep in the crust, waiting. And now it was waking up. Now it was asking questions. Mara knew what she had to do. She had to go to the zone of silence herself. Part 5. The Descent. The zone of silence sits in the Mapimi Biosphere Reserve, a protected area of Chihuahuan Desert in northern Mexico. It's one of the most remote regions in North America, hours from the nearest city, accessible only by rough dirt roads that disappear in sandstorms. Locals call it the Zona del Silencio because radio signals fail there, compasses spin, electronic equipment malfunctions. The Mexican government officially attributes this to natural magnetic anomalies. Unofficially, they discourage visits. Mara arrived on a Thursday morning in early May, driving a rented Toyota 4Runner loaded with scientific equipment she'd purchased with her own credit cards. She'd taken emergency leave from JPL, citing a family crisis. She didn't tell her supervisor where she was really going. The drive from Torreon took 6 hours across increasingly rough terrain. The highway gave way to paved rural roads, then gravel, then dirt tracks barely visible through desert scrub. GPS stopped working 50 kilometers out. Mara navigated by paper maps and a compass that spun lazily, useless. She'd studied satellite imagery for days, memorizing landmarks. A distinctive rock formation shaped like a broken tooth. a dry riverbed that carved through red stone, a cluster of weathered buildings that might have been a ranch decades ago. She found the crash site by following the geometry visible only from space. The desert looked empty at ground level, just sand, rock, and thorny vegetation stretching to the horizon under a merciless sun. But Mara had printed satellite images with infrared overlays, and she'd marked the centre point with GPS coordinates that she'd recorded before the signals failed. She parked the 4Runner, grabbed her equipment and hiked. The temperature was 42 degrees Celsius. The air shimmered. Nothing moved except dust devils that twisted across the flats like ghosts. And then the sound started. At first Mara thought it was her imagination, a subsonic vibration more felt than heard, but as she approached the coordinates it grew stronger. A hum, a pulse, 18 cycles per second, just like the reports from 1970. It resonated in her chest, made her teeth ache, made her afraid. She stopped at the crest of a low ridge and looked down. The ground was wrong, not obviously wrong, but wrong in subtle ways that made her brain struggle to process what she was seeing. The sand had formed patterns, concentric circles radiating from a central depression, too regular to be natural. The rocks were oriented in parallel lines as if organised by something with purpose, and at the centre the sand was moving, not blowing in the wind, moving, shifting, reorganising itself grain by grain into geometric structures that caught the light and glinted like metal. Mara descended into the depression, her equipment rattling in her backpack. She carried a Geiger counter, no radiation, a magnetometer, wildly fluctuating readings, and a portable mass spectrometer, completely non-functional. At the centre of the pattern she knelt and pressed her gloved hand into the sand. It was warm, and it was humming. She dug, not deep, just 30 centimetres down, brushing sand away with careful strokes. And there, just beneath the surface, she found it. Metal, not a fragment, not a piece, a structure. Smooth, grey, crystalline veins running through darker substrate. It extended beyond what she could see, disappearing under the surrounding desert. She cleared more sand, working faster now, and the structure emerged. Hexagonal patterns, each cell roughly 50 centimetres across, fitted together with impossible precision. It wasn't buried, it was integrated, fused into the bedrock, growing through the stone like roots through soil. Mara pulled out her phone, no signal but the camera still worked, and started documenting. She photographed the structure from every angle, noting the geometric precision, the crystalline growth patterns, the faint iridescence where sunlight struck the surface. And then her phone died. Not the battery, the entire device simply stopped working. She looked at her watch. It had stopped too. The hands frozen at 3:47. The magnetometer in her pack started beeping frantically, and the humming grew louder. Mara stood, backing away from the exposed structure. The sand around her feet was moving now, grains organising themselves into lines that pointed toward the centre, toward her. She heard it then, not with her ears, but inside her head. A sensation of presence, of attention focused on her like a spotlight. It knew she was there. She ran. Mara made it back to the 4Runner, threw her equipment in the back, and drove. She didn't stop until she reached Torreon 3 hours later, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. In her hotel room, she dumped the memory card from her camera and opened the files on her laptop. Most of them were corrupted, but 3 survived. 3 images showing the hexagonal structure emerging from the sand, crystalline veins glinting in afternoon sun, impossibly precise geometric patterns extending beyond the frame. Evidence, proof that something was down there, something vast, something ancient, something alive. Mara uploaded the images to a secure cloud server, then copied them to 3 USB drives. She mailed one to her brother in Oregon, one to a colleague in Germany, and kept the 3rd. Then she called NASA. Part 6. The Revelation. Delaney, what the hell were you thinking? James Ruiz, her supervisor at JPL, looked more tired than angry. They sat in his office at 8 in the morning, 2 days after Mara's return from Mexico. She'd been summoned by email. My office, Monday, 8 a.m, mandatory. I was following the data, Mara said. You were trespassing in a foreign country on unauthorized leave, investigating classified material that you accessed illegally. Ruiz leaned back in his chair. Do you understand the position you've put this lab in? Did you look at the images I sent? I looked. I also got a call from the Defense Department asking why one of my scientists was digging around in restricted archives. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across. This is your termination paperwork. I'm supposed to have you sign it today. Mara's stomach dropped. James dash. I'm not going to do that. Not yet. Ruiz stood and walked to his window looking out over the JPL campus. But you need to stop. Whatever you think you found, it's above our pay grade. Way above. It's not above anyone's pay grade, Mara said quietly. It's bigger than security clearances and classified files. Something is buried under that desert, and it's been growing for 50 years. Maybe longer. Maybe billions of years. And we accidentally woke it up. Ruiz turned. You sound paranoid. I sound right. He studied her for a long moment. What do you want me to do, Mara? Let me present my findings, internally, just to the atmospheric science team. If they think I'm crazy, I'll resign. But if they see what I see, then what? We publish. We go public? Ruiz shook his head. That's not how this works. If what you found is real, there are protocols, channels, ways of handling this that don't involve rogue scientists and international incidents. The protocols failed 50 years ago, Mara said. They found this thing in 1970, studied it, realised it was dangerous and buried it. And now it's waking up. The signal is getting stronger every day. Ruiz was silent for a long time. Finally he sighed. I'll give you 1 week. Compile everything you have, every data point, every analysis, every image. Make it bulletproof. Then we'll decide together what to do with it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. And Mara, no more trips to Mexico. She nodded, but they both knew she was lying. That night Mara couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table reviewing data until her eyes burned. The signal pattern from the zone of silence, the growth rate of the atmospheric particulates, the geographic distribution of electromagnetic anomalies. And then she saw it, the pattern she'd been missing. She pulled up a global map and plotted every major electromagnetic anomaly on Earth. Not just the obvious ones, the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea, the zone of silence, but every location where compasses misbehaved, where radio signals failed, where the magnetic field showed unexplained variations. 47 locations worldwide. When she connected them, they formed a network, a geometric lattice that covered the entire planet, with nodes positioned at mathematically precise intervals. The same hexagonal structure she'd found in the Mexican desert, scaled up to planetary size. Earth wasn't just hosting these structures. Earth was the structure, the rocks, the iron core, the magnetic field itself. All of it, billions of years of geological history, might have been influenced, shaped, grown by this ancient metallic organism that had seeded itself in the planet's crust before life even began. Humanity hadn't evolved on Earth. Humanity had evolved inside something else. Mara's phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Hello? Mara Delaney? A woman's voice, calm and professional. Who is this? My name is Dr. Carmen Vasquez. I worked with Arturo Salazar in 1970. I need to meet with you. Tonight. It's urgent. Mara's pulse quickened. Salazar died in a plane crash. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Meet me at the Griffith Observatory parking lot in 1 hour. Come alone, and bring your data. The line went dead. Mara knew it was probably a trap. She went anyway. Griffith Observatory sat on the southern slope of Mount Hollywood, overlooking Los Angeles. At night the city spread below like a circuit board, millions of lights arranged in patterns that mimicked the hexagonal networks Mara had been studying. She parked and waited. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in her late 70s. Grey hair pulled back, moving with surprising agility. Mara Delaney, you said you knew Arturo Salazar. I was his graduate student in 1970. I was with him when he collected the fragment from the crash site. Carmen sat on the bench beside her, looking out over the city. He didn't die in that plane crash. He went into hiding after the Monterey lab burned down. He knew they were coming for him. Who? The people who've been managing this situation for 50 years. The ones who decided the world couldn't handle the truth. Carmen pulled a weathered notebook from her bag. Arturo spent the rest of his life studying that fragment. He died in 2003, but before he did, he asked me to find someone who could finish his work. Someone brave enough to look at the evidence and not look away. She handed Mara the notebook. The pages were filled with diagrams, calculations, spectroscopic analyses, and theories. Brilliant, terrifying theories about what the fragments represented. He called it the substrate, Carmen said quietly. A metallic organism that seeded itself in Earth's crust 4 billion years ago, before the first cells evolved. It's been dormant all this time, growing so slowly that geological processes buried it kilometers deep. But the 1970 crash, that missile impact, it was like hitting a nerve. It woke something up. The signal, Mara whispered. Not just a signal, a network coming online. Arturo believed the substrate has been monitoring Earth's magnetic field for billions of years, waiting for the right conditions. And now, with all our satellites, radio transmissions, power grids, we've created an electromagnetic environment that's feeding it, making it grow faster. What does it want? Carmen smiled sadly. Arturo spent 30 years trying to answer that question. He never did. But he believed the substrate isn't hostile. It's just waking up, remembering. And the signal? Where? It's not threatening us. It's asking us. Asking where it is. What happened? How much time has passed? 4 billion years, Mara said. That's how much time has passed. Yes, and now it's confused, trying to understand a world that's completely different from the one it knew. Mara looked at the notebook, at Arturo Salazar's careful handwriting documenting 50 years of secret research. What am I supposed to do with this? What Arturo couldn't. Tell the world, not through government channels or classified briefings, but directly. Show them the evidence. Let them decide how to respond. They'll never believe it. They will. Because the signal's getting stronger every day. Soon, everyone will hear it. Mara spent the next 3 days compiling everything. Salazar's research, her atmospheric data, the satellite imagery, the signal recordings. She created a comprehensive report that laid out the evidence in clear, undeniable terms. Then she uploaded it to every major scientific journal, every news organisation, every government agency she could think of. Within hours, her access to NASA systems was revoked. Within a day, federal agents appeared at her apartment, but by then it was too late. The data was out there, spreading, replicating across the internet faster than anyone could contain it. Scientists around the world began confirming her findings, the electromagnetic anomalies, the atmospheric particulates, the VLF signals emanating from dozens of locations worldwide, and then, on a Thursday morning in late May, every radio telescope on Earth picked up the same signal. Not just from the zone of silence, from everywhere, from the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea, the Mozambique Channel. 47 locations worldwide, all broadcasting simultaneously. The same binary sequence repeating. And then, 3 hours later, a new sequence. The world didn't end, it changed. Within a week, the United Nations convened an emergency session. Scientists testified. Evidence was presented. Governments that had spent 50 years hiding the truth were forced to acknowledge it. Yes, something ancient existed beneath Earth's surface. Yes, it was waking up. No, they didn't know what would happen next. Mara watched the proceedings from her apartment in Pasadena, unemployed but vindicated. Her phone rang constantly. Journalists, researchers, government officials, all wanting to talk about the substrate. She ignored most of them, but she answered when Carmen Vasquez called. "You did it," the older woman said. "Arturo would be proud. I just showed them the data. They did the rest. That's all science ever is. Showing people what's really there and trusting them to handle the truth." Mara looked at her laptop where a new email had just arrived. The subject line: Collaborative Research Initiative, Substrate Communication Project. They wanted her help. The world wanted to understand what was waking up beneath their feet. They wanted to communicate with it, learn from it, figure out how to coexist with something that had been here long before humans and would likely be here long after. It was the biggest scientific challenge in human history. And Mara Delaney, unemployed atmospheric scientist, was at the centre of it. She smiled and opened the email. "I'm in," she said. 6 months later, the first successful communication was established. Not through radio signals or electromagnetic pulses, but through something simpler: rhythm. Researchers in Mexico tapped out patterns on the exposed hexagonal structures in the zone of silence, and the substrate tapped back. It wasn't language, not yet, but it was contact, a dialogue between humanity and something impossibly ancient. A conversation that would take decades, maybe centuries, to develop into understanding. But it had begun. Mara stood in the Mapimi desert, her hand pressed against the warm metal beneath the sand, and felt the gentle hum vibrating through her palm. 18 pulses per second. The heartbeat of a world beneath the world. She thought about Arturo Salazar, who died keeping this secret safe. About Ellis Hawthorne, who'd realised too late what they'd discovered. About all the people who'd glimpsed this truth and been silenced or ignored. They'd been afraid of what would happen if the world knew, but the world had proven them wrong. Humanity hadn't panicked, hadn't collapsed. Instead, people had done what humans always did when confronted with something mysterious and vast. They'd gotten curious. They'd started asking questions. And now, slowly, carefully, they were learning to listen to the answers. Mara pulled her hand away from the metal and stood. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Around her, an international team of researchers worked steadily, documenting, analysing, communicating. 54 years after a missile went off the course and crashed into the zone of silence, humanity had finally made first contact. Not with visitors from the stars, but with something even more profound. The ancient intelligence woven into the very fabric of the world they called home. The Earth had always been alive. They were just finally learning to hear it speak.